Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing within the ancient city of Rome. Not the Rome of bustling tourists and crowded piazzas, but the Rome of 2,000 years ago, when marble gleamed beneath the sun, when the air was heavy with the smell of olive oil and incense, and when knowledge itself was treated as both a treasure and a weapon. It is late evening. The streets are growing quiet. The markets have folded, the bakers have banked their ovens, and the shouts of the forum have faded into silence. A thin veil of twilight rests upon the rooftops, where terracotta tiles glow like dying embers. You walk slowly, guided only by the faint flicker of torches mounted upon stone walls. Their flames sway in the soft night breeze, and with them, shadows dance upon the ground. Somewhere beyond these streets lies a place whispered about but seldom entered. A place where time itself seems to pause. A sanctuary built not of gold or of weapons, but of parchment and papyrus. Rome's lost library. Few knew its true extent, fewer still ever stepped inside, and yet its memory lingers, like a ghost drifting through the corridors of history. What was once gathered there, scrolls of science, poetry, magic, and prophecy, may still lie hidden, sleeping beneath centuries of dust and ruin. Or perhaps it has been lost forever, its words turned to ash, its secrets drowned in silence. Tonight, we journey together through the memory of that library, through the stories of the men who dreamed it, the scholars who guarded it, and the flames that may have consumed it. This is not a story of battles or kings, but of something more fragile, more human. The yearning to remember, the hunger to preserve, the fear of forgetting. Breathe slowly and walk with me now, deeper into the ancient heart of Rome. Picture the forum where senators in white togas once debated the fates of nations. Behind those voices, beyond the glitter of politics and power, rose another kind of authority. The authority of knowledge. For Rome, though often remembered for its soldiers and legions, was also a city of words. Scrolls flowed into its gates like rivers, brought from Greece, from Egypt, from the far reaches of conquered lands. Each scroll was not just ink and fibre, but a voice from another age, another mind, a whisper made solid. Can you hear them? The whispers of Plato, Aristotle, the physicians of Hippocrates, the astronomers of Babylon, all of them once nestled in Rome's shelves, copied by careful hands, preserved by firelight, guarded by silence. And yet, many of those voices are gone, lost not to conquest nor to time alone, but to an event we cannot fully trace. Somewhere in Rome's story lies the memory of a vanished collection. A library erased. Was it fire? Was it theft? Or was it deliberate silence? The thought lingers in the air, like a candle's flame just before it gutters out. We know Rome had many libraries. Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, emperors who ruled not only by sword but by scroll. They filled halls with statues of the muses, built marble porticos where citizens could stroll and read, ordered scribes to copy Greek wisdom into Latin tongue. And yet there is mention, faint and uncertain, of another library. One that gathered more than the others, one that was said to contain works too precious, too dangerous, or too strange to share. Some call it the Lost Library of Rome. Imagine stepping through its doors. The hall is long, cool, and scented faintly of cedar wood, used to line the shelves. Bronze lamps flicker from niches in the wall, casting pale light across rows of scrolls stacked high in pigeonhole cubbies. Their edges are sealed with ivory tags, each marked with a title in faded ink, on the stars of the east. Hymns of the old gods, on machines that turn without end, some familiar, some impossible. In the silence you hear the scratching of a stylus. A scholar bends over a wax tablet, copying the words from a roll of papyrus that came all the way from Alexandria. His lips move silently as he reads, as if repeating the words will bind them more tightly into memory. There is a reverence here. Every step feels heavy, as though the air itself resists disturbance. For this is no marketplace of gossip, no forum of fleeting speech. This is the quiet heart of human thought. And then, as if carried by the wind of centuries, a question arises. Where is it now? Was it consumed in the flames of Nero's Rome, buried beneath the rubble of barbarian invasions, locked in hidden vaults beneath the Vatican, guarded from the eyes of the world? Or perhaps it still waits, intact, beneath the soil of the Palatine hill, asleep like an emperor in his tomb. The story we're about to follow is not simple. It is a tapestry of fragments, names half remembered, texts half preserved, ruins half buried. But within those fragments lies a haunting melody, the echo of what once was, a library not merely of Rome, but of the world. And so let us begin. The night deepens, the city grows still. Your footsteps echo softly as we pass from torchlight into shadow, from certainty into rumour, from history into mystery. Ahead lies the story of scrolls and secrets, of scholars who whispered to the future, and of a library that may yet dream beneath the dust, a library waiting for us to remember. When most people think of Rome, their minds leap first to triumphal arches, to marching legions with bronze helmets glinting in the sun, to gladiators straining against chains in the Colosseum. Rome, the conqueror. Rome, the empire of stone and blood. But beneath that image lies another Rome, a quieter one, often overlooked in the roar of history. A Rome that was not only an empire of armies but an empire of minds. For within her walls Rome cultivated another kind of dominion, the dominion of knowledge. Let us wander into that subtler empire. Imagine walking through the Forum in the midday sun. Stalls overflow with spices from the east, amphorae of wine from the provinces, and silk that gleams like liquid moonlight. Senators in white togas argue in shadows of columns, voices sharp as daggers. But if you look closer, you notice another kind of trade happening in corners, quieter but no less powerful, the exchange of scrolls. Booksellers set up modest booths, displaying papyrus rolls wrapped in red or black ribbons. Some contain poems of Virgil, newly copied and already celebrated. Others, fragments of Greek philosophy, translated into the sturdy rhythm of Latin. A Roman aristocrat pauses, fingers running lightly across the curled parchment, deciding which wisdom to take home. Knowledge here is not simply a luxury, it is currency, prestige, power. Rome understood this truth. An empire is not secured only by swords, it is also secured by stories, by laws, by the written memory of civilizations. And so, from an early age, Rome nurtured an almost insatiable hunger for words. The first libraries in Rome were modest, private collections held by wealthy families, often imported from Greece. When Rome conquered a city, it carried away not just treasures of gold and marble, but crates of manuscripts. Captured knowledge was paraded in triumph alongside prisoners and loot. For a victorious general, a chest of books could be as prized as a chest of jewels. Soon, these private hoards expanded into something larger. Politicians began to open collections to the public, not entirely from generosity, but from ambition. To build a library was to build a monument to oneself, a legacy of intellect as enduring as stone. And so, libraries became not just houses of study, but symbols of Rome's might. Picture the Palatine hill, where the emperor's palaces rose against the sky. There, Augustus, Rome's first true emperor, ordered the creation of one of the earliest great libraries. Its halls were lined with marble, its shelves carved from cedar and cypress, resistant to insects and decay. Statues of Apollo and the Muses stood sentinel, reminding all who entered that knowledge was under divine protection. Citizens wandered through, some reading aloud in whispers, others tracing letters with calloused fingers. For many it was the first time they had been in the presence of so many voices, gathered from across centuries and continents. Rome had conquered nations, but here it conquered time. The pulse of this intellectual Rome beat strongest in its scholars. Names like Cicero, Seneca, Pliny the Elder, and Galen drift across history like faint stars. They debated philosophy, studied medicine, chronicled nature, and dissected the heavens with eager eyes. Their works were copied, stored, passed from hand to hand, a chain of thought unbroken, until, much later, the chain was shattered. Even ordinary Romans felt the rhythm of this knowledge. Boys rehearsed their lessons on wax tablets, reciting lines of Homer or Ennius beneath the stern gaze of their tutors. Rhetoricians practiced speeches in colonnades, their words echoing like thunder between the stones. The city itself seemed alive with a murmur of memory, with the hum of 1,000 thoughts carried on the air. And yet, Rome's relationship with knowledge was never innocent. For Rome understood the double edge of words. Knowledge could elevate, but it could also subvert. It could grant power, but also threaten it. A library was both treasure and danger. Within its scrolls could lie philosophies that challenged empire or secrets that undermined gods. This is why libraries, though often open to the public, were also closely watched. Scrolls were catalogued, censored, sometimes forbidden. Rumours spread of works hidden away, their contents too strange or perilous for ordinary eyes. And so the heart of Rome beat with both desire and fear, a hunger for knowledge and an anxiety about its cost. If you pause, you can almost hear it. The steady rhythm, like a drum beneath the earth, the beating heart of an empire not of legions, but of letters, the rustle of papyrus like the whisper of wings, the scratching of styluses like the soft ticking of time. Rome's knowledge was fragile, vulnerable. Every scroll was a body made of reeds and ink, perishable and mortal. To preserve them was to fight against the eternal erosion of time. To lose them was to silence voices forever. And yet, Rome risked it, again and again, gathering more, hoarding more, dreaming of a library that could contain the world. In this way, Rome was not unlike Alexandria, its great rival in the realm of letters. The Library of Alexandria stood as the crown jewel of ancient knowledge, a beacon to which all turned. Rome could not bear to be outshone. To rival Alexandria was to declare Rome not just the ruler of lands, but the ruler of wisdom itself. Thus, scrolls arrived daily, from Greek philosophers, from Egyptian priests, from Babylonian astronomers. They were copied, translated, absorbed into Rome's bloodstream. Slowly, steadily, the city transformed into a living archive, not a city of soldiers only, but of scribes, thinkers, dreamers. And yet, here lies the haunting truth. We know of this Rome only in fragments. We know it through references, through second-hand mentions, through the survival of a few texts that slipped past the fire. The rest is silence. The rest is absence. What was once the beating heart of Rome's knowledge now comes to us faintly, like an echo heard across a canyon. We strain to hear it, we dream to reconstruct it, and in that dream we whisper of a lost library, one that may have contained all the missing pieces. Perhaps it stood at the edge of the Palatine, perhaps beneath the Capitoline, perhaps nowhere we can name, only everywhere we imagine. But it was Rome's dream, to hold the wisdom of the world. Let us pause here. Breathe slowly. Picture Rome not as an empire of stone, but as an empire of words. Picture scrolls stacked like soldiers, thousands upon thousands, each bearing a fragile voice. Picture senators pausing in their arguments to consult a text, generals clutching maps copied from Greek originals, physicians reading formulas for herbs grown in distant lands. The heart of Rome was not only its armies, it was this, the beating rhythm of a knowledge, rising and falling like a hidden tide. And as we listen to it, we cannot help but wonder how much of that rhythm still survives, and how much has been swallowed by silence. Close your eyes again and let the centuries peel back. The bustle of medieval streets fades. The sound of horse hooves is replaced by the echo of sandals on marble. You're standing now in the twilight years of the Roman Republic, when the city was on the cusp of transformation. When Julius Caesar walked these same stones, envisioning not only the conquest of nations, but the conquest of time. For Caesar was a man of restless ambition. He wanted monuments to carry his name across eternity. Bridges, roads, theatres, laws. But in the quiet chambers of his mind there stirred another vision, the vision of a library that would gather together the wisdom of all peoples Rome had touched, and preserve it forever under his patronage. Caesar's unfinished dream. It is said that Caesar planned to build a great public library, one to rival Alexandria itself. He appointed Marcus Terentius Varro, a scholar of immense reputation, to oversee the project. Varro, a man of endless curiosity, had already compiled an astonishing catalogue of human knowledge, from farming to philosophy, from grammar to religion. He was to be the guiding hand of Caesar's dream. Imagine it, a grand structure rising beside the Forum, its portico shaded by columns of white travertine, its halls alive with the sound of scribes. The scrolls would come from every corner of the empire, Greek tragedies, Egyptian astronomy, Carthaginian histories, Celtic myths whispered into Latin script. But before the dream could take form, Caesar fell beneath the daggers of the Ides of March. The library remained unbuilt, existing only in the shadowed corridors of what might have been. Rome lost not only a ruler that day, but the birth of a sanctuary of knowledge that might have changed the course of memory. And yet, the dream did not die. Augustus and the birth of Rome's libraries. When Octavian, later Augustus, emerged from the chaos of civil war as Rome's first emperor, he understood the power of symbols. He He rebuilt temples, raised monuments, restored order to a city torn apart by ambition. But he also remembered Caesar's vision. Augustus founded not one, but two great libraries. The first stood on the Palatine hill, near the Temple of Apollo, the god of light and prophecy. The second rose in the Porticus of Octavia, near the theatre that bore his sister's name. Together, they became the beating centres of Rome's intellectual life. Step into the library of Apollo on the Palatine. The air is cool, perfumed faintly with cedar and wax. Sunlight filters through tall windows, illuminating marble statues of the Muses, Calliope, Clio, Erato, guardians of poetry and history. Between them stand shelves lined with scrolls, their ivory tags marked in neat lettering. One hall is devoted to Latin works, speeches of Cicero, laws etched into memory, poems of Virgil still fresh with the scent of ink. Another hall is filled with Greek texts, brought from across the Aegean, tragedies of Aeschylus, dialogues of Plato, treatises on medicine and astronomy. Rome's own identity and the heritage of the Greeks stand side by side, each strengthening the other. Here, citizens wander freely. Some read aloud in whispers, savouring the rhythm of words. Others consult legal texts or gaze at diagrams of stars. For the first time, knowledge is not merely the property of aristocrats. It is placed in a temple-like hall where even the common man may stand in awe of wisdom. The theatre of memory. To walk through Augustus's libraries was not simply to study. It was to enter a theatre of memory. Every statue, every column, every scroll was arranged with care to remind visitors that Rome was heir to all knowledge. The emperor was not just a ruler of armies, but the custodian of the world's mind. One can imagine the quiet pride Augustus felt as he walked these halls. He, the man who had brought peace after decades of bloodshed, now brought order to the chaos of memory. The libraries stood as a promise. Rome would not only conquer lands, but would also guard the wisdom of the past. And yet even here shadows lingered. The fragility of scrolls. Consider the nature of the scrolls themselves. Made of papyrus reeds, pressed and dried, or of parchment scraped from animal hides, they were fragile as breath. They could crumble in damp air, mould in darkness, or ignite in a single spark. To preserve them was a constant battle against decay. Scribes laboured endlessly, copying and recopying texts. Each mistake, each slip of the hand could alter meaning forever. And yet, this fragile medium was all that stood between memory and oblivion. The irony is sharp. Rome built monuments of stone that still stand after 2,000 years, but its greatest treasures, the thoughts of its people, were entrusted to papyrus, destined to vanish like smoke. The scholar's presence. Picture a scholar seated in one of Augustus's libraries. He holds a scroll in both hands, unrolling it slowly, line by line. His lips move silently, for reading aloud was the custom of the time. His eyes flicker with fire as he copies notes onto a wax tablet balanced on his knee. Perhaps he's reading Aristotle on ethics, or Hippocrates on medicine. Perhaps it is poetry, verses of Homer that sing of war and longing. Whatever the text, he is aware of a strange intimacy. He holds in his hands the voice of someone long dead, resurrected in ink. The library hums with such resurrections. Every visitor carries a ghost with them as they read, the ghost of an author, whispering through centuries. Rome and its rival, Alexandria. It is impossible to stand in Augustus's libraries without thinking of Alexandria, the great beacon of learning across the Mediterranean. The Library of Alexandria was a legend even in Roman times, a place where every ship entering the harbour was searched for books to copy. Its collection was said to number in the hundreds of thousands. Augustus's libraries were smaller, but they carried a different weight. Alexandria was a jewel of Egypt, while Rome's libraries were the heart of empire itself. To walk their halls was to feel the majesty of Rome woven into the fabric of thought. And yet the rivalry carried an unspoken fear. What if Alexandria held secrets Rome did not? What if wisdom beyond measure existed elsewhere, beyond Augustus's grasp? Perhaps this fear fed the desire to gather ever more scrolls, to expand Rome's libraries until they contained everything, until nothing was beyond Rome's reach. The echo of ambition. In these early libraries we hear the echo of Caesar's dream. Though he did not live to see it, Augustus brought it to life, not once but twice. His libraries became models for those that followed, foundations for Rome's later grandeur of knowledge. But beneath the triumph lies melancholy. for we know now that most of those scrolls are gone. We can only imagine the texture of their papyrus, the ink faded by candlelight, the thoughts that once lived upon them. The libraries stand no more, their halls are dust. Still, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The murmur of readers, the shuffle of sandals, the soft crackle of papyrus unrolled. The dream lingers, faint but unbroken, in the memory of humanity. And so, Rome's first great libraries were born of ambition and devotion, the ambition of Caesar cut short, and the devotion of Augustus, who gave form to a vision of eternity. They were temples not of gods, but of words, temples that whispered to all who entered. Rome is not only empire, Rome is memory. Let us rest here for a moment, in the marble halls of the Palatine Library, where the air is still cool and the light still slants through tall windows. Let us linger with the ghosts of scrolls that once lived here, before we follow them further, deeper into the shadows of history, into the mystery of a library that would one day vanish. Step softly now as we leave the marble porticos of Augustus's libraries and descend into their quieter chambers. For behind every glittering hall of statues and scrolls there existed another world, a world of ink-stained fingers, flickering lamps, and unending patience. A world of scribes. The grandeur of Rome's libraries might dazzle the visitor, but their life depended not on marble nor bronze. It depended on men, and sometimes women, whose work was silent, meticulous, and often forgotten. They were the keepers of memory, the guardians of voices across time. The work of the scribe. Imagine a small room dimly lit by a single oil lamp. The air is thick with the smell of burning olive oil, wax, and cedar dust. At a table sits a scribe. Before him lies a roll of papyrus, unspooled across the wood. In his hand a reed pen cut sharp, its tip dipped into dark ink made of soot and gum. Slowly, with careful strokes, he copies the words of another. The work is steady, almost meditative. Each line must be straight. Each character must flow without blot or smudge. His eyes strain in the weak light. Hours stretch into nights, nights into years. This is the rhythm of his life, to preserve voices not his own, to ensure that thought does not vanish with flesh. The scribe is at once invisible and indispensable. Without him, no poem of Virgil could reach beyond a single copy. No philosophy of Plato could travel from Athens to Rome. No history of Livy could survive the decay of one fragile roll. He is the link between mortality and eternity. Whispers in the lamplight. There is a kind of intimacy in the act of copying. As the scribe's pen moves, he becomes the silent companion of the author whose words he traces. He hears their thoughts whispered across centuries and answers with his own steady hand. Imagine a young scribe copying the verses of Catullus. As his reed pen glides, he mouths the tender words of love, feeling them as if they were his own. Another copies the maxims of Stoic philosophy, and perhaps those words, though written by another, begin to shape his soul. Thus, copying was not mere labour, it was communion, a dialogue between the living and the dead, errors, secrets and choices. Yet scribes were human, and human hands are never flawless. Mistakes slipped in, a skipped line, a misplaced word, an accidental repetition. Over centuries such errors multiplied, and sometimes changed meaning entirely. A single slip could alter history, and sometimes perhaps the changes were not mistakes. A scribe might soften a phrase to please a patron, he might omit a passage deemed dangerous, he might insert a word of his own, a quiet rebellion against authority. Thus, within the fragile chain of transmission, tiny secrets hide, fingerprints of unknown keepers of memory. It is a haunting thought, that what we know of Rome may not be exactly what Rome wrote, but what Rome's scribes allowed us to remember. The copying halls. Not all scribes worked alone. In the great libraries there were rooms filled with the scratching of dozens of pens. Dictation was common. One reader recited aloud while many scribes copied at once, their hands racing to keep pace with the voice. The room would hum with sound. Not conversation, but the rhythm of ink meeting papyrus, a chorus of preservation. These were the factories of memory, churning day and night to keep pace with the empire's hunger for books. Every general, senator, and scholar wanted texts. Demand was endless, and the scribes answered with unbroken devotion. Slaves of the word, many scribes were slaves, trained from youth to read and write with precision. Wealthy Romans prized literate slaves as treasures, for they could fill private libraries with copied works. To be a scribe slave was to live in paradox, shackled by law, yet entrusted with the words of the greatest minds. There were also freedmen and citizens who chose the craft, often out of love for learning. But in every case, scribes lived in the margins of history, rarely named, often forgotten. Their anonymity was the price of immortality for others, the keepers beyond the scribes. But scribes were not the only guardians. There were also librarians, custodians of order. Their task was not to copy, but to catalogue, to maintain the architecture of memory. Imagine a man standing in the cool hall of the Palatine library, holding a wax tablet inscribed with lists. He marks each scroll by its ivory tag, assigns it a place among shelves, notes its title and author. He is the mapmaker of knowledge, ensuring that within the labyrinth of scrolls nothing is lost. These librarians were often scholars themselves, men of reputation who oversaw not just preservation but censorship. For in Rome, not every text was welcome. Works deemed subversive, heretical, or seditious could be hidden away or destroyed entirely. Thus, the keepers of memory were also gatekeepers of silence. The fragile chain. Think of it. Every work of Rome that survives today, every poem, every speech, every fragment, exists because a scribe once bent over a desk by lamplight, and because a librarian once placed that copy in its rightful place. Without their labour, the chain would have broken, and silence would reign where once there were words. Yet the chain was fragile. Fire could snap it in a night. War could sever it in an hour. Neglect could wear it thin until it frayed. Rome's keepers of memory were valiant, but they fought against forces larger than themselves, time, chaos, and oblivion. An imagined scene, close your eyes and see it. A winter evening in Rome. Outside, the streets are damp with rain. Inside the library, the lamps are lit, casting circles of light on marble floors. Rows of scrolls stand silent, shadows stretching between them. In a side chamber, a handful of scribes sit at narrow desks. The sound of styluses scratching fills the air like insects humming in summer grass. The men are weary, their backs bent, but their hands move steadily, almost mechanically. A reader's voice rises and falls in the background, reciting lines of Aristotle. The scribes echo him in ink, line after line, hour after hour. None of their names will be remembered, but the words they copy will outlast them, if fortune is kind. The mystery of the hidden hands. Somewhere in that endless chain there may have been scribes who touched forbidden texts, works whispered of but seldom seen, treatises on alchemy, prophecies of forgotten oracles, maps of lands beyond Rome's sight. Did they copy them faithfully? Did they hide them, smuggle them away, bury them in secret? Perhaps in the very act of preservation some scribes became conspirators. Perhaps fragments of the lost library owe their survival not to emperors, but to these silent hands who disobeyed, who carried scrolls away into shadow. History cannot tell us, but the thought lingers that among the keepers of memory were those who chose which memories would live and which would die. A quiet reverence. As we reflect on them now, the scribes and librarians of Rome appear not as nameless shadows, but as the true guardians of civilization. Without them, the triumphs of generals and emperors would be dust, their names forgotten. Without them, Rome would have left only ruins of stone, not voices of thought. They remind us of a simple truth. Empires rise and fall, but the written word, if preserved, can outlast marble, outlast bronze, outlast kings. And yet, how much was lost even with their devotion? How many words slipped between their fingers? How many secrets did they keep or let vanish, knowingly or not? The mystery of the lost library is not only about halls of marble and shelves of cedar. It is also about the hands of those who copied, catalogued, and chose, the keepers of memory and the silent shadows they left behind. And so, as the lamps burn low and the scribes rest their weary hands, we step back into the night of ancient Rome. Behind us, the halls of scrolls still whisper, alive with ink and breath. Ahead lies the deeper mystery. What secrets lay hidden in those fragile rolls, and what knowledge was too dangerous to survive? We will turn to that question next as we unroll the scrolls themselves and discover the fragile vessels of Rome's wisdom. The Library of Rome, vast and gleaming in marble, was not made of stone alone. Its true body, its true soul lay in things far more fragile, rolls of papyrus and parchment, fragile as breath, perishable as autumn leaves. They were the vessels of thought, carrying within them the voices of poets, philosophers, physicians, historians. Yet each scroll was vulnerable, mortal, balanced always on the edge of silence. Let us step closer to them now and trace their delicate existence. The birth of a scroll. To create a scroll was no small feat. It began in the lands of the Nile, where papyrus reeds swayed in the slow current of the river. The reeds were harvested, sliced into thin strips, and pressed together in layers, the fibres running first one way, then another, like threads woven into cloth. Pressed, dried, polished smooth, they became sheets, pale, sturdy, and thirsty for ink. These sheets were joined edge to edge, glued into long ribbons that could stretch many feet. Rolled carefully around a wooden rod, tied with cords, sealed with tags of ivory or leather, and thus a scroll was born. In another place parchment was made. Skins of sheep or goats, scraped thin, bleached in the sun, smoothed by pumice stone. More durable than papyrus, but heavier, rarer, more costly. A scroll of parchment was a treasure, often reserved for works of highest importance. Thus every scroll was both humble and sacred. It was reed and skin, ink and glue, yet also the vessel of a human soul. The language of scrolls, open one, and you step into another time. Letters flowed across the surface without space between words, an unbroken river of thought. The reader's lips moved silently, unravelling the current, drawing sense from the flood. Margins were narrow, corrections were few. To unroll a scroll was to journey physically as well as mentally. You rolled one side open as the other closed, inch by inch, line by line, until the story revealed itself. Reading was not a quick glance, but a pilgrimage. At the end, a wooden knob marked the finish. On its edge might be carved a title, or the name of the author. Often, a tag of ivory dangled from the roll, bearing the inscription of its content. It was not so simple as opening a book. It was a ritual. The care of scrolls. Imagine a Roman librarian walking slowly down the aisles. Shelves of pigeonhole niches line the walls, each containing a scroll, sometimes dozens stacked together. The air is scented with cedar, whose oils were believed to ward off insects. In some libraries, scrolls were kept in cupboards with bronze doors, shut tightly against damp air. To protect them was endless labour. Papyrus cracked in dryness, warped in humidity, turned brittle with age. A single spark could ignite hundreds at once. And so, caretakers moved softly, reverently, for they knew they walked among tinder. Even so, loss was inevitable. Worms burrowed unseen, mice chewed in silence, a forgotten leak stained a whole shelf black. Every scroll lived under constant threat. The whispering contents. What did these scrolls hold? Let us unroll them in imagination. One scroll unfurls, revealing the tragedies of Sophocles, words we still know today, but beside it lies another, unknown, its title lost, its story swallowed by time. Perhaps it was a play never performed, or a poem never heard beyond a single circle of friends. The library gathered both alike. Another scroll bears diagrams of the stars copied from Babylonian tables, their numbers precise as constellations. Another contains chants from Egyptian temples, hymns to gods now long forgotten. Another records the herbal cures of Galen, recipes for salves and tonics that mingled science and superstition. The shelves of Rome's libraries were thus a chorus of voices, some still familiar to us, others silenced forever. We know a fraction of what they carried, and only guess at the rest. The fragility of memory. Consider this. Of all the literature produced in Rome and Greece, only a tiny portion survives today. The majority, perhaps 9 out of every 10 works, has vanished. Entire schools of philosophy known only by name. Entire shelves of plays, histories, and poems lost without a trace. And each loss was not abstract. It was the disappearance of a scroll, a roll of papyrus that once lay upon a shelf in the city. A real object with weight, with texture, with scent, carried in the arms of a librarian, held in the hands of a scholar, whispered into air by a reader. And now, gone. It is as though we walk through a vast hall once filled with music, now echoing only faint notes that remain. The ritual of reading. Step into a reading room. A scholar sits on a low stool, scroll across his knees. He unrolls it slowly, reciting aloud. The words echo softly against the marble. Other readers sit nearby, each lost in their own murmur. The chamber becomes a low hum of voices, a hive of whispering knowledge. There is a rhythm to it. Unroll, read, re-roll, tie, replace. The act of reading becomes as ritualized as prayer, and in this ritual the scroll reveals itself not only as a vessel of words, but as a presence, an object alive with mystery. Scrolls in ceremony and power. Scrolls were more than instruments of learning. They were also symbols of authority. A senator might clutch one while delivering a speech, invoking the weight of precedent. A general might consult a scroll of maps before marching. An emperor might display a rare manuscript as proof of his dominion not only in arms, but in wisdom. Thus, scrolls held power beyond their words. To possess them was prestige. To display them was triumph. A conquered city's library could be paraded as proudly as its captured king. The lost scrolls. But scrolls perish. Fires, invasions, accidents, each took their toll. The fire of 64 CE under Nero may have consumed countless shelves. Later, when Goths and Vandals stormed the city, scrolls were scattered, burned, trampled underfoot. Even in peace, neglect devoured them slowly, invisibly. Some may still lie hidden, carbonized by volcanic ash, as at Herculaneum, where hundreds of scrolls were turned into blackened cylinders. To the eye they seem ruined, but within, the ink still whispers, awaiting the patient eyes of modern machines to awaken them. The thought shivers through us. Perhaps somewhere, deep beneath soil or stone, a scroll lies sleeping even now, a lost voice of Rome, waiting to speak again, a fragile immortality. And so each scroll in Rome's library was both immortal and mortal. Immortal because it carried thought across centuries. Mortal because it could vanish in a heartbeat. A single careless hand, a single lick of flame, and centuries dissolved into smoke. The paradox is haunting. Rome built aqueducts that still carry water, roads that still bear footsteps, walls that still stand. But its truest treasures, its scrolls, were delicate, ephemeral, more fragile than a flower's petal. The whisper of absence. Let us linger here, in the hush of a Roman library, among the shelves of fragile vessels. Imagine the faint rustle of papyrus as it unrolls, the faint scent of cedar and wax, the quiet murmur of readers. Imagine the countless voices carried in these rolls, voices that once filled Rome with a second empire, an empire of thought. And then imagine silence. Imagine the shelves bare, the niches empty, the scrolls gone. The silence is heavier than stone, deeper than ruin. It is the silence of forgetting. This silence is what we inherit. We walk among fragments, piecing together what remains, dreaming of what is lost, and always, in the distance, we hear the ghostly whisper, "What if?" The scrolls of Rome were fragile vessels, and many shattered upon the waves of time. Yet some few fragments drifted to us, enough to hint at the vast sea that once existed. And within that sea may have been the greatest mystery of all, a hidden library, a lost collection, a treasure of words swallowed by history but not entirely by memory. As we move onward, let us follow that whisper, deeper into the empire of thought. For beyond scrolls and shelves there were halls built to house them, libraries raised by emperors, monuments to human knowledge. And it is there we turn next, to the age of Tiberius, Trajan and Hadrian, when Rome's libraries reached their golden glory. The story of Rome's libraries does not end with Augustus. His marble halls, gleaming on the Palatine and in the porticus of Octavia, were only the beginning. The emperors who followed, Tiberius, Trajan and Hadrian, each left their own mark upon the architecture of memory. They raised new sanctuaries of learning, each shaped by their character, each whispering its own message about what Rome valued, feared, and dreamed. Let us wander now into their shadows. Tiberius, the reluctant guardian. Tiberius, the stepson of Augustus, is remembered as a man of shadows. Reserved, austere, often suspicious, he did not dazzle with grand gestures. He preferred Capri's solitude to the roar of the forum, and yet, even Tiberius understood the power of knowledge. He inherited not only Augustus's throne, but also his libraries. He tended them quietly, not expanding greatly, but preserving. Under his watch, Rome's existing collections were safeguarded, their catalogues maintained, their scrolls copied anew. It is easy to imagine Tiberius walking through the hushed aisles, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the ivory tags of scrolls. He was not a man of spectacle, but of control. In these libraries, As in the empire itself, order mattered more than glory. Though he built no monumental new library, his care ensured the survival of many texts that might otherwise have faded in the transition of power. He was not a creator of memory, but a guardian, reluctant, severe, but steady. Trajan, the architect of grandeur. If Tiberius preserved quietly, Trajan built boldly. Known as Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, Trajan expanded Rome's dominion to its greatest extent. His reign was an age of prosperity, construction, and triumph, and among his many gifts to the city, he raised one of the most magnificent libraries of antiquity. It stood in his great forum, a complex of marble and bronze that glittered like a jewel in the heart of Rome. Flanked by the Basilica Ulpia and the soaring column of Trajan, the library was divided into two halls, one for Latin texts, one for Greek. Step inside. The air is cool and still, thick with the scent of polished stone. Light pours through high windows, casting pale beams across the walls lined with niches. Within each niche rests a cabinet of scrolls, their ivory tags gleaming faintly. Between the rows, statues of philosophers and poets gaze silently, marble eyes fixed in eternal contemplation. The architecture is vast, almost overwhelming. Here, knowledge is not only preserved, it is displayed as spectacle, a monument as grand as any temple. To enter Trajan's library was to feel the empire's confidence, its certainty that it could contain the wisdom of the world. Imagine senators and scholars walking those halls, debating Cicero beneath the gaze of Homer, consulting legal texts before addressing the forum. Here, Latin and Greek met as equals, two halves of Rome's intellectual soul. The library was a bridge, not only between cultures, but between past and future, and at its heart stood the column of Trajan, carved with the story of conquest in Dacia. Words on scrolls and images in stone, together they proclaimed Rome's might in war and in thought. Hadrian, the philosopher-emperor, then came Hadrian, the restless traveller, the emperor-philosopher. Unlike Trajan, who expanded the empire with armies, Hadrian strengthened it with walls, art, and ideas. He was a man of culture, a lover of Greece, a poet, and a thinker. His reign gave birth to one of the most celebrated libraries of the ancient world, the Library of Hadrian in Athens. Yes, not in Rome, but in the city of philosophy itself, where Socrates once walked and Plato once taught. Hadrian's library was a gift to Greece, a symbol of his devotion to Hellenic culture. Built of marble, adorned with columns and gilded ceilings, it was more palace than library. Within its walls were scrolls upon scrolls, gathered from across the empire, offered freely to the scholars of Athens. Step into its courtyard. Columns of Corinthian style rise against the sky, surrounding a pool of still water. Beyond the porticos, chambers open into reading halls lined with cedar and ivory. Here, the wisdom of Greece and Rome meet once more, not in rivalry, but in harmony. Hadrian himself is said to have walked these halls, speaking with philosophers, listening to poets recite, debating astronomy, architecture, and art. For him, the library was not merely a storehouse. It was a living space of dialogue, a temple where knowledge breathed. Three faces of the library. Consider the contrasts. Tiberius, the keeper of order, guarded Rome's scrolls like a stern sentinel, ensuring continuity and silence. Trajan, the builder, raised a library of grandeur, an architectural monument proclaiming Rome's triumph in knowledge as in conquest. Hadrian, the philosopher, created a library of conversation, a sanctuary where cultures mingled and ideas flourished. Each man's library reflected his soul, and together they show us the many faces of Rome's relationship with wisdom, the life within. Let us wander again slowly through these halls as though in a dream. In Trajan's forum, a senator in a crimson-edged toga bends over a Greek scroll, lips moving in quiet murmur. Nearby, a scholar compares Latin histories, scribbling notes on a wax tablet. Children follow their tutor, eyes wide at the sight of so many statues, their first encounter with the grandeur of learning. In Athens, under Hadrian's golden ceiling, philosophers debate beneath the colonnade. Their words echo softly against the marble, mingling with the rustle of scrolls unrolled. A traveller from Egypt recites hymns of Isis, while a Roman poet composes new verses in the shadow of Plato. Everywhere the hum of knowledge, a living chorus, fragile yet eternal. The shadows behind the glory, and yet, behind the grandeur lurks fragility. These libraries, splendid though they were as mortal as the scrolls they held. Fires could consume them, wars could shatter them. Even neglect could hollow them out, until shelves stood bare and silence reigned. Already whispers of loss began. A scroll misplaced, a shelf destroyed in dampness, a copy never made. For every library built, a dozen scrolls perished elsewhere, unseen, unmarked. The grandeur could not prevent the slow gnawing of time. The libraries of Tiberius, Trajan, and Hadrian were peaks of glory, but their shadows hinted at the abyss of forgetting. Echoes in the present. Fragments of these libraries linger still. The ruins of Hadrian's library in Athens stand under the Greek sun, their marble columns pale against blue sky. The remnants of Trajan's forum remain in Rome, their stones silent witnesses to vanished scrolls. They remind us not only of what was, but of what was lost, for the shelves are empty now. The scrolls are gone, the voices are silent, only the stones remain, hollow shells of memory. And yet, as you walk among those ruins, you can almost hear the whispers, the rustle of papyrus, the murmur of scholars, the voice of emperors who once dreamed of eternity through words, the golden age of libraries. Still, we must pause and honour this moment in Rome's history. For in the age of Tiberius, Trajan, and Hadrian, libraries were not mere storerooms. They were palaces, temples, monuments. They stood as Rome's golden age of learning, when emperors themselves bent toward wisdom, when the empire sought not only to rule the world but to remember it. This was Rome at its intellectual height, Rome as a custodian of the past and a teacher for the future. In these libraries the heart of knowledge beat strong, steady and proud. But as always, golden ages cast long shadows, for no glory endures unbroken. Beyond the triumphs, beyond the marble and the statues, darker questions loomed. What secrets were hidden within these scrolls? What knowledge was too dangerous, too strange, too powerful to share? And what happened when flames or silence swallowed them? And so, we leave these halls of glory with reverence and unease, for even as they gleamed, their doom was already written in fire and shadow. Next, we will step into those shadows, unrolling the whispers of forbidden knowledge, the secrets Rome's scrolls may have carried, and the fears they inspired. Beneath the Mediterranean sun, far from the hills of Rome, stood another city of stone and water, gleaming with white columns and crowned by one of the wonders of the world. Alexandria, the jewel of Egypt, the crossroads of East and West, the city of light and memory. If Rome was the beating heart of empire, Alexandria was the restless mind of civilization, and within its walls stood the greatest library the ancient world had ever known. For centuries its very name stirred awe and longing. To speak of Alexandria's library was to speak of human ambition at its loftiest, the attempt to gather all knowledge under one roof. And Rome, proud Rome, could never forget that it had a rival. The lighthouse and the library, the two marvels of Alexandria, were sisters. The lighthouse of Pharos, guiding sailors across treacherous seas, and the great library, guiding minds through the seas of thought. Both rose from the vision of the Ptolemies, Greek rulers of Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. Both embodied light, one literal, one metaphorical. The library was said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, histories from Babylon, astronomy from Persia, medical treatises from India, poems from Greece, law from Egypt itself. Ships docking in Alexandria were searched, their scrolls seized, copied, and sometimes kept, so that the library might swell with every tide. Imagine walking its colonnades, the air heavy with papyrus dust, the shelves bending beneath the weight of centuries. Imagine scholars debating beneath painted ceilings, their voices mingling with the cries of gulls drifting in from the harbour. Alexandria was a city where the world's voices met. Rome looks south. From the moment Rome first cast its gaze across the Mediterranean, Alexandria haunted its imagination. To conquer Egypt was one thing. To conquer Alexandria's library was another. When Julius Caesar set foot in the city during the civil wars, legend whispers that flames spread to parts of the library. Whether by accident or design, scrolls perished, smoke rising into the sky like prayers unfulfilled. Some say tens of thousands of texts were lost in those fires, others that the damage was less. The truth is uncertain, but the shadow of loss clung to the story ever after. Later, when Rome annexed Egypt, Alexandria's library stood under the shadow of the eagle. Rome, the new master of the world, looked upon its rival with both envy and pride. To possess Egypt was to possess the Nile's grain, the wealth of temples, and perhaps the greatest treasury of wisdom. Rome's answer: Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, each in his way tried to craft Rome's libraries in response. If Alexandria was the beacon of memory, Rome would be no less. Rome's libraries multiplied. In the Forum, on the Palatine, in Athens under Hadrian's hand, each was a declaration: we too are guardians of knowledge, we too can house the voices of the world. Yet always the comparison lingered. Alexandria was legend whispered of in awe. Rome's libraries were real, but they seemed to chase the shadow of that dream. Imagine Roman scholars sitting in the Forum of Trajan, unrolling scrolls copied from Greek originals. They knew perhaps that somewhere in Alexandria other texts still slumbered, texts never yet seen in Rome. Did they wonder what secrets those shelves held? Did they envy the Egyptians their temple of thought, the dream of total knowledge? The rivalry between Rome and Alexandria was not only pride, it was also the reflection of a deeper dream, the dream of total knowledge. For both cities sought to do the impossible, to capture the world in words, to seize every story, every calculation, every chant and myth, and bind them into scrolls. It was an ambition larger than empire, larger than stone. In this dream, the library was more than a building. It was an ark of memory, a fortress against forgetting. If Alexandria's library could truly hold everything, then the past would never die, and the future would always have a guide. Rome desired the same. To control knowledge was to control destiny. To lose it was to admit that time itself was stronger than empire. The fragility of glory. But both cities shared the same weakness, fragility. Alexandria's library, despite its grandeur, perished. Not once, perhaps, but many times, in fires and neglect, in the slow erosion of centuries. Some say it was destroyed by Caesar's flames. Others point to later centuries, when Christians or invading armies reduced its shelves to ash. The truth is tangled, but the outcome certain. The library is gone. And Rome, too, though it built magnificence, could not escape the same fate. Its scrolls vanished in flames, in sacks, in silence. The rivalry was, in the end, not between two cities, but between memory and forgetting. And forgetting, relentless, triumphed over both. The scholar's perspective. Pause here, and imagine yourself as a scholar of the 2nd century, a citizen of Rome who has travelled to Alexandria. You stand before the ruins of the lighthouse, the spray of the sea on your skin, and then enter the halls of books. Scrolls tower above you, a forest of papyrus and ink. You unroll a scroll copied from Babylonian astronomers. Its numbers chart the movements of planets, the dance of the heavens. You unroll another, hymns to gods you have never known, their names strange, their rituals alien. Another, a map of lands east of India, drawn by sailors whose names are lost. You realize, as you read, that knowledge is infinite. No city, not even Alexandria, not even Rome can contain it all. The dream is noble, but impossible. And yet, how beautiful the attempt. The envy of Rome. Rome envied Alexandria, but it also feared it. For within those Egyptian shelves lay wisdom older than Rome itself, texts of pharaohs, chants of priests, mysteries of pyramids. To possess them was to stand in the shadow of civilizations older, deeper, perhaps wiser than Rome. Some whispered that Alexandria's scrolls held forbidden sciences, engines that moved without beasts, formulas for eternal life, prophecies of the world's end. Rome, pragmatic and proud, both coveted and mistrusted such lore. It is here, perhaps, that the myth of Rome's lost library begins. For if Alexandria had treasures beyond measure, surely Rome too must have gathered them. And if they are not with us now, then they must be hidden, locked away, lost in silence. The mirror of memory. The rivalry between Rome and Alexandria is in truth a mirror. Each reflected the other's ambitions, each chased the other's shadow. Both dreamed of eternal memory. Both succumbed to time. Their libraries were not failures, but reminders. Reminders that knowledge is like water. It flows, it gathers, it seeps away, it evaporates, and sometimes it returns as rain. We cannot hold it forever. We can only cup it in our hands for a moment, pass it along, and hope some drops survive. Echoes across centuries. Today, Alexandria's library is remembered in ruins and legend, while Rome's libraries are recalled through fragments and footnotes. But in imagination, they still live. In every whisper of papyrus found at Herculaneum, in every fragment quoted by later writers, In every ghost of text we reconstruct, we hear their voices. Rome and Alexandria both remind us that human beings have always longed to conquer forgetting, and that forgetting always waits, patient, inevitable. And so, as we leave the colonnades of Alexandria and return to the hills of Rome, we carry with us this rivalry not as bitterness, but as a haunting harmony. Two cities, two empires, two dreams, both glorious, both doomed, both still alive in memory. Next, we will step beyond rivalry into the shadows of secrecy, asking, what hidden knowledge did these libraries hold? What was so dangerous, so strange, that Rome itself might have sought to bury it in silence? The marble halls of Rome's libraries gleamed in the sunlight, their shelves crowded with scrolls tied in silk and tagged in ivory. To a casual visitor, these collections were simple: poetry, philosophy, histories of conquest, speeches of statesmen, words to entertain, to instruct, to inspire. But there were whispers, always whispers, that deeper within the shelves, in cupboards locked and shadowed, lay works never meant for every eye. Scrolls whose words trembled with danger. Scrolls that carried not only wisdom, but secrets. For knowledge is never neutral. It can heal, but it can also wound. It can enlighten, but it can also unravel. And Rome, ever conscious of its power, understood that within its libraries were truths that might shake empires. The sciences of the heavens. Among the scrolls were texts of astronomy, not merely the simple movements of stars, but intricate charts carried from Babylon, Persia, even India. Tables of numbers mapping the wanderings of planets, predictions of eclipses, calculations that seemed to pierce the veil of heaven. To the ordinary reader, these were curiosities, perhaps useful for farmers or sailors, but to the superstitious they were more. The line between astronomy and astrology was thin. A chart of stars could become a prophecy of emperors, a prediction of Rome's fate. Imagine a senator unrolling a Babylonian scroll that spoke of a conjunction of planets, said to herald the fall of kings. Imagine his unease, his glance over his shoulder. To possess such knowledge was power, but also peril. The arts of healing. Other scrolls contained recipes of herbs, roots, and minerals. Some were the teachings of Hippocrates, some the experiments of Galen, some the lore of Egyptian priests. They spoke of salves to close wounds, draughts to ease childbirth, powders to dull pain, but mingled with them were stranger cures, potions brewed beneath certain phases of the moon, amulets inscribed with secret words, formulas said to prolong life. Where science ended and magic began, no one could say. Did some scrolls promise immortality? Did they whisper of alchemy, of transforming base matter into gold, or flesh into spirit? The line is blurred in memory, but the whispers suggest that in those libraries lay more than medicine. They lay the human dream of eternity, the lost histories. Beyond science and medicine, there were histories Rome did not wish to remember. Accounts of conquered peoples told not by Roman victors, but by the vanquished. Stories of Carthage from Carthaginian lips, tales of Gauls and Celts in their own voices, songs of druids extinguished by legions. What if such scrolls contradicted Rome's official story? What if they revealed atrocities, or wisdom Rome had sought to bury? It is easy to imagine that some of these scrolls were hidden away, locked in vaults, perhaps quietly destroyed. For empire is built not only on conquest but on narrative. To control memory is to control the past, and to control the past is to control the present. The forbidden faiths. Religion too left its traces. Hymns of Egypt, chants to Isis and Osiris, rituals of Mithras whispered in underground temples, scrolls that spoke of gods older than Jupiter, of mysteries that promised salvation beyond the grave. Rome tolerated many cults, but feared others, especially those that gathered followers in secret, or promised loyalty to truths beyond empire. What if the libraries held texts that described initiations, mysteries, or prophecies that undermined the gods of Rome? It is said that some early Christian texts, fragile and forbidden, also passed through Rome. Letters, gospels, visions. To the authorities they were dangerous, seeds of unrest. To believers they were treasures of light. Did some find their way onto the shelves, hidden among other writings? Did the keepers of memory protect them, or consign them to flames? The knowledge of machines. There are tantalizing hints in ancient writers of machines beyond their age. Hero of Alexandria described devices powered by steam, doors that opened automatically, fountains that seemed to flow by magic. If such inventions were recorded in scrolls, did some of them reach Rome? Did Rome's engineers study them, perhaps even attempt them? Imagine a scroll describing a wheel that turned without end, or a machine that harnessed fire to move. Marvels that, if true, might have changed the course of history. Why then did Rome not build them? Perhaps the knowledge was deemed impractical, perhaps it was lost, or perhaps it was deliberately hidden, its power feared as much as desired. The scrolls of prophecy. Above all, Rome feared prophecy. Scrolls said to foretell disasters, famines, uprisings. The Sibylline books themselves, a collection of oracles guarded by priests in the temple of Jupiter, were consulted in times of crisis. Their words could sway emperors, alter laws, decide the fate of nations. But what of other prophecies? Less sanctioned, less controlled? Did libraries hide scrolls that predicted Rome's fall, its burning, its division? Did they speak of barbarians crossing the frontiers, of emperors struck down, of the empire dissolving like smoke? Such scrolls, if they existed, would not be displayed openly. They would be hidden, perhaps locked in chests, their words known only to a few. And when the time came, perhaps they were destroyed, so that no one might whisper that Rome's fate was written long before. The weight of secrets. Consider the librarians, the keepers of order. Their duty was not only to catalogue, but to decide which texts to preserve, which to restrict, which to erase. Each choice was a thread cut or tied in the fabric of memory. Perhaps one night, in a quiet chamber, a librarian unrolled a scroll that spoke of strange stars or forbidden gods, or machines that moved on their own. He read, frowned, and rolled it shut again. Did he place it on a shelf, or hide it in a chest? Did he whisper of it to a friend, or seal it away in silence? Such choices shaped what survived, and what was lost. They remind us that libraries are not only treasures of openness, they're also vaults of secrets, the allure of the hidden, and so the image of Rome's libraries changes. No longer only marble halls open to sunlight, but also shadowed rooms, locked cupboards, hidden shelves, places where forbidden scrolls rested, waiting for eyes that might never see them. This is the allure of the lost library. Not merely that Rome had books we no longer possess, but that among them may have been words too strange, too dangerous, too wondrous for their time. Words that, if read today, might alter how we see the ancient world and ourselves. A dream in the night. Close your eyes and dream of such a scroll. Perhaps it is slender, tied in crimson ribbon. Its ivory tag reads only, "On the fire of the gods." You untie it, unroll it. Lines of Greek flow across the papyrus. They describe a device of bronze and steam, wheels turning by invisible force, a machine of motion, centuries before its time. Or another scroll, wrapped in faded leather. Its tag says "Songs of the West." You unroll it and find words of a people long conquered, their myths of a land beyond the ocean, a world Rome never knew. Or another, blackened at the edges, its title smudged. You read and find prophecies of fire in the city, of an empire divided, of ruins beneath grass. Your breath slows, you roll it shut. Perhaps it was better forgotten, and thus we stand at the threshold of shadow. Rome's libraries contained not only wisdom but secrets. Some whispered of eternity, some of machines, some of gods, some of endings. Many are gone, but their absence lingers like a hollow echo. Next we will step into fire itself, into the nights when flames rose high, when scrolls turned to ash, and when silence began to fall upon the voices of Rome. Fire is memory's oldest enemy. It consumes quickly, greedily, leaving nothing but blackened fragments. A scroll that took months to copy, a lifetime to compose, can vanish in a heartbeat of flame. And Rome, the city of stone and power, was never safe from fire. Again and again, flames rose above her rooftops. Again and again, her libraries trembled in their glow. The Great Fire of 64 CE, the most infamous of these disasters, struck in the summer of 64 CE. It began, we are told, in the shops near the Circus Maximus. A careless spark, perhaps, or a deliberate act. The wind caught it, and soon the fire roared through the city like a beast unchained. For 9 days Rome burned. Roofs collapsed, temples fell, homes turned to ash. Columns cracked in the heat, statues melted into formless shapes. And amid the chaos, scrolls, thousands upon thousands, curled into smoke. No one knows how many libraries perished that week. Some say the fire devoured whole collections. Others insist that imperial libraries were spared. But we can imagine the scene. Shelves collapsing as flames licked upward, papyrus rolls bursting into sparks, scribes rushing in desperation to save what they could, carrying bundles of scrolls into the streets. Think of the sound, the crackle of flame mingling with the faint hiss of papyrus shriveling. Think of the sight, words written by poets, philosophers, and prophets drifting upward as ash, their voices dissolving into the dark sky. Nero's shadow. The fire became forever linked with Nero, the emperor. Some accused him of ordering it to clear land for his golden house. Others claimed he played his lyre as the city burned. The truth is uncertain, but the rumour stained his name. Yet even if Nero did not cause the flames, he could not prevent their consequence. Knowledge was lost. Rome's libraries, already fragile, suffered wounds that could never be healed. And so, even as Nero rebuilt the city with marble and colonnades, something invisible was gone. Scrolls that would never be recopied, stories never retold. The fire was not only the destruction of buildings, it was the silencing of memory. Other flames. The Great Fire of 64 was not alone. Rome burned many times, in smaller blazes, in riots, in accidents. Each time shelves were at risk. Each time losses multiplied. Later centuries brought greater devastations. In 192 CE, under the reign of Commodus, another great fire swept through the city, devastating temples and libraries alike. The Temple of Peace, which housed part of the imperial library, was consumed. Scrolls gathered for generations turned to dust in a single night. Imagine again the scene, priests and librarians weeping as sacred texts collapsed into embers. Philosophical works, medical treatises, lost histories, all swallowed by fire. The invasion of flames. If fire from within was not enough, fire from without followed. In 410 CE, the Visigoths under Alaric stormed Rome. Torches and swords alike tore through the city. Scholars wrote that the libraries suffered, though how much we cannot know. In 455, the Vandals plundered again, carrying treasures across the sea. By then the empire was weak, its guardians few, its shelves vulnerable. And still later, in 546, the Ostrogoths under Totila ravaged Rome. Each sack stripped away more of its memory. Each fire left another hollow. The empire that once prided itself on preserving the wisdom of the world could no longer preserve its own. The fragility of papyrus. Why did fire strike so hard at Rome's memory? Because its soul was papyrus. Papyrus is tinder. It blackens in an instant, curls, shrinks, vanishes. A library is not like a stone monument which resists flames. It is like a field of dry reeds, once lit, unstoppable. Picture a hall filled with thousands of scrolls, each a cylinder of dry plant fibre wound tight. One spark, and the hall becomes a furnace. Flames race from shelf to shelf. In moments, centuries of thought collapse into ash. Even those scrolls not burned often perished after. Smoke stained them, moisture warped them, insects nested in weakened fibres. A library need not burn entirely to be ruined. The fire's touch was enough to doom its treasures slowly. The silence after. What is most haunting is not the fire itself, but the silence after. Imagine entering a library the morning after a blaze. The marble walls still stand, blackened by soot. The statues remain, cracked, their eyes staring blindly. But the shelves, they are empty, hollow. A few fragments of papyrus flutter in the air, fragile as moth wings. The air smells of smoke and loss. The scribes and librarians walk slowly, stunned. They lift shards of scrolls only to find them crumbling in their hands. Generations of labour, months of copying, the voices of countless authors, all gone in a single night. The silence must have been unbearable, a pattern of forgetting. So often we think of history as one continuous thread. But in truth, it is a fabric full of holes, burned away by flame. For every scroll of Rome we possess today, perhaps 10 others once existed and are now gone. Whole shelves of plays by Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus have vanished. Entire books of Livy's history of Rome, gone. Writings of Aristotle, lost. The poems of Sappho reduced to fragments. Each loss, a library unto itself. And so, Rome's libraries became graveyards of memory as much as sanctuaries. Each fire was a burial, each ember a tombstone. The fear of fire. The Romans knew the danger. They built some libraries in stone to resist flame. They lined shelves with cedar to repel insects. They copied texts onto parchment, less fragile than papyrus. But no precaution was enough. Fire is patient. Fire waits. And when it comes with hunger nothing can deny. Perhaps this is why the idea of a lost library stirs us so deeply. Because we know how much was lost, we long to believe that somewhere, somehow, a secret collection escaped. That beneath the ashes, beneath the ruins, beneath the centuries, scrolls still slumber, untouched by flame, the shadow of ash. As we imagine Rome's libraries burning, we are left with an ache, the ache of absence. We know what might have been. We know that voices silenced by fire might have changed the course of human thought, what cures might have been written, what histories, what inventions, what visions of the stars, of the earth, of the soul. We will never know. The ashes whisper, but they do not speak. And so, we leave the smouldering halls, their shelves empty, their memory gone. The fires of Rome were not merely disasters of wood and stone. They were the undoing of voices, the unravelling of human continuity. They remind us that knowledge is fragile and forgetting is always near. Next, we will follow the rumour of silence further, into the mystery of the lost library itself, the one collection said to vanish entirely, leaving behind not even ash, but only questions. Not every loss in Rome's story came from fire. Fire leaves behind ruins and ashes, reminders of what once was. But there are disappearances more subtle, more haunting, vanishings where nothing remains, no ruin, no ember, only silence. And so we come to the most elusive thread of all, the tale of Rome's lost library. It is not one library we can point to with marble foundations and charred shelves. It is not a single place we can excavate and map. It is instead a legend stitched from fragments, hints scattered in ancient texts, shadows that refuse to resolve into substance. Some speak of it as a hidden collection, buried deep beneath palaces or temples. Others whisper it was carried away, spirited off to secret vaults. Still others believe it perished in the tumults of Rome's decline, erased so cleanly that only memory remains. Whatever the truth, the thought lingers like incense in the air. Somewhere there was a library of Rome that is no longer, a gathering of scrolls that has vanished utterly from the visible world. The whispers of historians. Ancient writers left tantalizing hints, mentions of collections far greater than what we can account for, catalogues listing authors whose works no longer exist, passing remarks about chambers filled with scrolls that are now untraceable. Pliny the Elder, the encyclopedist whose own natural history survived, speaks of books and writings whose whereabouts are uncertain even in his day. Suetonius, chronicler of the Caesars, refers to lost collections and confiscated works. And later scholars, peering back through centuries, repeat rumours of rooms filled with books that vanished without explanation. Each mention is small, like a single spark in darkness. But together they form a constellation, faintly suggesting that beyond the libraries we know, Augustus's Palatine library, Trajan's forum, Hadrian's Athenian gift, there was something else, something larger, more mysterious, more fragile. Theories of the vanishing. Over the centuries, countless theories have grown around the mystery. Some say the lost library was hidden, that in times of crisis, scrolls too precious to risk were gathered into vaults beneath the Palatine Hill, or sealed in underground chambers near the Capitoline. Perhaps they say they still lie there, entombed in dust, awaiting rediscovery. The Vatican's secret archives are often invoked in this tale, as if what was once Rome's might now sleep beneath the guardianship of the Church, hidden from the world. Others claim it was stolen, that during the sacks of Rome, by Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, treasures of knowledge were carried away as plunder, scrolls loaded onto wagons, shipped across seas, scattered across barbarian kingdoms until they perished unremembered. Still others believe it was deliberate, that emperors or priests destroyed texts they deemed dangerous, works of heresy, prophecy, or forbidden sciences, better to erase them than let them spread. In this theory, the lost library did not vanish by accident, but by design. And a final whisper suggests something stranger still, that it never vanished, but was absorbed, swallowed into other collections, renamed, repurposed. Its scrolls live on, but we no longer know which they were. The library was not destroyed, but forgotten, its identity dissolved. The allure of hidden knowledge. Why does the legend cling so tightly? Perhaps because we know how much Rome truly lost. The gaps in our memory are vast. Of Livy's monumental history of Rome, 142 books, only 35 remain. Of the works of Sappho, but fragments. Of Aristotle's treatises, only scattered parts. If so much is missing, why not believe that somewhere a hidden trove survived? A cache of scrolls untouched by flame, still whispering in their sleep beneath stone. Imagine the discovery. A chamber unearthed beneath the Forum, filled with shelves of scrolls preserved by miracle. To open them would be to restore centuries of silence. The very thought makes the heart tremble. The silence as evidence. Yet perhaps the silence is itself the answer. If the lost library ever existed, its vanishing was complete. No catalogue survives, no list of its holdings, no clear account of its fate. It is absence made perfect, a hole in history so clean it seems intentional. And absence, in its own way, is louder than presence. We feel it in every missing voice, every broken chain of thought. We sense the shape of what is gone by the shadows it casts across what remains. An imagined journey. Close your eyes and let us imagine the lost library together. It is night in Rome. The streets are quiet, the air heavy with smoke from distant fires. Beneath the Palatine, torches flicker in a hidden corridor. A small group of men carry bundles of scrolls, their ivory tags clinking softly. They whisper as they move, their sandals echoing on stone. They descend into a chamber lit by oil lamps. The walls are lined with niches, shelves carved into rock. One by one, they place the scrolls inside, sealing them from the world above. Perhaps they believe they are saving them for the future. Perhaps they are hiding them from prying eyes. Perhaps both. The lamps are extinguished. The chamber falls to darkness. Centuries pass. Dust gathers. The empire falls. The city crumbles. The chamber remains. Is it there still, or is it only in our dreams? Echoes in later ages. Medieval whispers kept the legend alive. Scholars of Byzantium spoke of hidden collections brought east before Rome's fall. Monks in Europe hinted that their libraries held texts copied from lost originals. Renaissance humanists longed for the discovery of ancient troves, each manuscript they found a fragment of the dream, and even today, archaeologists and adventurers speculate. Perhaps beneath Rome's palaces, untouched chambers remain. Perhaps in desert sands or shipwrecked cargoes, scrolls of the lost library wait. Each discovery, a carbonized scroll from Herculaneum, a forgotten papyrus in Egypt, fuels the hope that something greater lies hidden. The vanishing symbol. Whether or not a physical lost library existed, the idea carries weight beyond fact. It is the symbol of all we have forgotten, of all that has slipped through history's fingers. It is the embodiment of absence, the ghost of memory itself. For in truth, every library is a lost library. No collection is ever complete. No preservation is forever. The human story is always fragmentary, always haunted by what is missing. Rome's lost library is not only a place, it is a reminder. A reminder that knowledge, though vast, is fragile, that memory, though precious, is perishable, that even the greatest empires cannot hold eternity in their hands. The dream that remains, and yet we dream. We cannot help it. We dream of scrolls yet unread, voices yet unheard, knowledge yet to return. We dream that beneath the earth, in vaults of stone, the lost library still sleeps, waiting for a hand to unroll its scrolls again. In our dream, we walk into the chamber. We strike a lamp. Dust swirls in the air. Our fingers trace the chords, untie them, unroll the first scroll. The ink is faded, but legible. Words rise into the air. Voices return. Silence breaks. We dream because the dream itself is a kind of memory, not of what was, but of what might still be. And so the lost library vanishes from sight, but not from imagination. It lingers in whispers, in shadows, in longings. Perhaps it never existed as a single place. Perhaps it is only the sum of all that has vanished. But to us, it is real. For its silence has shaped our memory as surely as its presence once did. Next, we will turn not to silence, but to voices, to the scholars whose work slipped into shadow, whose names remain while their writings are lost. They are the human face of the lost library, men and women who spoke, but whose words no longer reach us. Here we let the story shift from shelves and flames to the fragile lives behind the scrolls, thinkers, poets, historians whose voices slipped into silence. As always, the tone will remain slow, lyrical and immersive, carried across 1,500 words. Part 11. The Forgotten Scholars. A library is not only wood and stone, papyrus and parchment. It is also breath and heartbeat, voice and vision. Behind every scroll once stood a living mind, a scholar bent in thought, a poet whispering verses, a historian tracing the arc of memory. And so, when we speak of lost libraries, we must remember also the lost people, those whose words have not reached us, those whose thoughts dissolved in fire and time. They are the forgotten scholars of Rome. Seneca, the philosopher of shadows. Let us begin with Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, tutor and advisor to the Emperor Nero. His essays and letters still reach us, whispering of calm in adversity, of wisdom in hardship. Yet much of his work is gone. He wrote tragedies, meditations, treatises on natural science. Only fragments remain. Imagine Seneca at his desk, the lamplight flickering on his calm face, his hand steady as he writes. Time discovers truth. How bitter that truth, when so much of his writing was swallowed by time itself. What thoughts might have softened Nero's cruelty if they had survived more fully? What words might have steadied later ages? We will never know. Pliny the Elder, the voice of curiosity. Pliny the Elder, the encyclopedist, is remembered for his natural history, a sprawling attempt to gather all knowledge of the world, from stars to stones, animals to plants. It is a treasure that survived. Yet he wrote much more. Treatises on grammar, rhetoric, history, gone. Pliny died in the eruption of Vesuvius, rushing toward danger to witness nature's fury. His voice, so curious, so brave, was silenced by ash. We are left with one great book, but not the fullness of his vision. He's a ghost half remembered, a scholar whose library of thought is itself a ruin. Livy, the historian of Rome. Titus Livius, Livy, was the great historian of Rome. His Aburbe Condita, from the founding of the city, stretched across 142 volumes, tracing the story of Rome from its mythical origins to his own day. We have only 35, the rest are gone. Imagine them, detailed accounts of wars, of laws, of daily life, of voices otherwise lost. Imagine the missing centuries of Rome's memory written down with care, now silent. To read Livy today is to walk through a grand palace of history, with whole wings collapsed, corridors leading to broken walls, doors opening into emptiness. His absence is one of history's greatest wounds, the poets in fragments. Consider also the poets. Sappho, whose verses once sang across Greece, survives only in scattered lines quoted by others. Catullus, who poured his heart into tender and bitter poems, is known to us but in part. Ovid, exiled to the Black Sea, wrote laments that survived, but others that vanished with him into silence. Every lost poem is not only art erased, but feeling erased. Joys, griefs, loves, despairs once entrusted to papyrus, now crumbled into dust. The silent histories. How many historians are lost to us entirely? We know them only by name. Cremutius Cordus, who wrote with honesty about the late Republic, was accused of treason. His books were burned by decree. Only fragments survive, quoted by later authors. His voice was silenced not by accident, but by fear. Fear of truth. Fear of memory. Countless others are hinted at but gone. Annalists who recorded battles, chroniclers of cities, biographers of forgotten lives. Their scrolls may once have filled Rome's shelves. Now they are as though they never existed. The physicians and engineers, beyond poets and historians, were practical minds, physicians, engineers, inventors. Their names are mostly unknown, their works are lost. But we see their fingerprints in Rome's aqueducts, in its roads, in its baths and amphitheatres. Imagine the scrolls they wrote, treatises on hydraulics, on medicine, on architecture. What secrets of engineering, what cures for disease, what understanding of the body and the earth might they have left us? Gone now, all gone. The ruins of Rome are their silent monuments, their words vanished, their achievements mute. The unknown majority. For every Seneca or Livy we name, there were dozens more. Ordinary scholars, modest poets, local historians, school teachers who copied verses, philosophers who debated in small circles. Their works may have filled shelves once, but none remain. It is a sobering thought. The vast majority of human thought is always lost. The written word delays forgetting, but never defeats it. Every library is a fragile bridge across oblivion, and most voices fall before reaching the far shore. An imagined gathering. Let's imagine for a moment all these forgotten scholars gathered together in some timeless hall. Seneca speaks calmly of virtue. Pliny eagerly describes a new plant. Livy recounts the bravery of a Roman matron. A nameless poet recites verses of love. a physician explains a cure. Their voices rise in a chorus of memory, and then, slowly, one by one, the voices fade. The hall grows dim. Only a few voices remain. The rest dissolve into silence. This is the sound of history. A chorus reduced to fragments, an orchestra playing with missing instruments. The pain of absence. There is a peculiar pain in this silence. We know these scholars lived. We know they wrote. We know their words filled shelves, were copied by scribes, were read by their peers, and yet they are gone. It is not the pain of never having existed. It is the pain of having existed, and then being erased, like a dream half remembered, like a name on the tip of the tongue, like a ghost at the edge of vision. The forgotten scholars haunt us because they remind us how fragile we are, how easily our voices slip away. Why we remember the few. Why did some works survive while others perished? Chance, mostly. A scribe chose to copy one text and not another. A monastery preserved one volume and let another decay. A conqueror spared one library and burned another. It was never merit alone. Great works vanished, lesser works endured. The sieve of history is not fair, not careful, not deliberate. It is random, and it leaves us with a distorted echo of the past. This is the true tragedy of the forgotten scholars. Not that they were unworthy, but that they were unlucky. The scholars ghost in us, and yet, though their words are gone, something of them remains, for ideas travel in chains. Seneca's stoicism shaped thinkers who shaped others still. Lost poems inspired echoes in later verses. Forgotten treatises influenced works we still hold. The scholars themselves are gone, but their ghosts linger in us. Their words ripple through centuries, unseen but present, like underground streams feeding rivers above, a lullaby of silence. So let us honour them, these forgotten scholars. Let us whisper their names when we can, and imagine those whose names are lost. Let us walk the empty aisles of Rome's vanished libraries and hear not only silence, but the faint hum of voices we cannot quite make out, voices speaking from beyond forgetting. For they remind us that all knowledge is fragile, that every word is a flame trembling against the wind. They remind us to cherish what remains, to treasure the fragments, to listen closely to whispers, and perhaps in dreams we may hear them still, Seneca's calm counsel, Livy's lost histories, the tender poems of nameless lips. Perhaps, when we sleep, they return for a moment, speaking softly before vanishing again into the dark. Thus ends our meditation on the forgotten scholars, the silent companions of the lost library. Next, we will step into history's harsher light, to the days when invading armies and plundering hands stripped Rome of its memory, scattering its scrolls to the winds of conquest. The story of Rome's libraries is not only one of quiet scribes, fragile scrolls, and whispered secrets. It is also a story of violence, of torches and swords, of boots pounding marble floors, of shelves torn open and treasures carried away. For when Rome weakened, its enemies came, and with them came plunder. The empire that once gathered knowledge from across the world, binding it into marble halls, found its own memory scattered like leaves in the storm. The sack of 410, Alaric and the Visigoths. It began in the year 410 CE. The empire was weary, fractured by politics, drained by endless wars. Into this weakness marched Alaric and his Visigoths, a people once Rome's allies, now her scourge. They descended upon the eternal city, breaching walls that had stood for centuries. The sack of Rome shook the ancient world. For 800 years Rome had seemed invincible, the heart of empire unassailable. And yet, in that summer, the unthinkable happened. Imagine the scene. Visigothic soldiers flooding into streets where senators once strolled, torches thrown into homes, statues toppled, treasures seized, and among those treasures, the libraries. What became of them? The records are silent. But we can picture scrolls ripped from their shelves, piled into carts taken as spoils. Soldiers, unable to read, tearing ivory tags from bindings to keep as trinkets. A lamp overturned, flames licking across parchment. Scribes and librarians fleeing into shadows, clutching a few salvaged volumes pressed against their chests. In that moment, centuries of preservation unravelled. Words that had crossed oceans, words that had survived fire and time, words that carried the memory of civilizations older than Rome, all scattered, lost, trampled under boots of conquest. The sack of 455, the Vandals arrive. If the sack of 410 was a wound, the sack of 455 was salt poured upon it. The Vandals, seaborne marauders from North Africa, sailed up the Tiber and stormed the city. Their name has lived ever since as a synonym for destruction, and though later historians argue they were not as merciless as legend claims, to Rome it was catastrophe. Once again, treasures were looted. Gold, silver, jewels, and scrolls. For a people who prized written words, the loss was immeasurable. Libraries were stripped, shelves emptied, carts loaded with manuscripts bound for distant shores. Did the Vandals understand what they carried? Did they know the worth of the papyrus rolls stacked in their wagons? Perhaps not. Perhaps they used them to wrap goods, to light fires, to serve as trophies. Knowledge that had endured for centuries may have ended as kindling in a campfire. And yet some may have survived, carried to Carthage, hidden in the homes of nobles traded across seas. The thought lingers. Fragments of Rome's libraries may have drifted eastward or southward, their survival unknown. The sack of 546, Totila, and the Ostrogoths. Rome suffered again in 546 when Totila, king of the Ostrogoths, captured the weakened city during the Gothic Wars. By then, Rome was a shadow of itself, depopulated, weary, its once great buildings hollow. When Totila's men entered, the libraries had already suffered. Many shelves were empty. But whatever remained, scrolls clutched by monks, collections hidden in temples, fragments of archives, was once again exposed to ruin. The sack of 546 was not only plunder but devastation. Totila nearly razed the city. What libraries had escaped earlier sacks may have perished here, reduced to smoke, or carried off by soldiers who valued parchment more for its texture than its content. By the end of this century, Rome, once mistress of the world's memory, had become a graveyard of learning. The fate of the scrolls. Where did they go, these scattered scrolls? Some must have been destroyed outright, burned in streets, used as torches, abandoned to damp and decay. Others may have been carried away as loot, travelling into barbarian hands. A few might have survived, treasured by those who recognised their worth, traded or gifted into monasteries, absorbed into the fragile chain of medieval learning. But most vanished, and with them vanished voices, histories of conquered peoples, poems never recopied, scientific treatises centuries ahead of their time. The invaders plundered not only Rome's wealth, but its soul. The silence of the scholars. What must it have felt like to be a scholar in those days? Imagine a man who has spent his life studying in the libraries of Rome. He knows the shelves intimately, every scroll's title, every shelf's order. He has walked those aisles in reverence, whispering to himself the words of Homer, Plato, Cicero. Now he walks the same aisles after the sack. The shelves gape, empty. Scrolls are gone, stolen or destroyed. Dust gathers where ivory tags once gleamed. The silence is heavy, oppressive. He touches the niche where his favourite manuscript once rested, a treatise on astronomy from Babylon, and feels only stone. He closes his eyes, and in that silence hears not the murmur of knowledge, but the echo of forgetting. For him, the sack is not only political, it is personal, it is the death of memory itself. Knowledge as spoil. To the invaders, Rome's wealth was tangible. Gold, silver, jewels, silks. Knowledge was intangible and so less valued. And yet, in a way, knowledge too was spoil. Scrolls could be taken, shown as trophies, even if their words meant nothing to those who bore them. It is possible, even likely, that some scrolls taken from Rome ended up in distant lands, perhaps read by foreign scholars, perhaps influencing cultures in ways we cannot trace. A word carried here, a diagram there, a verse echoing faintly, but mostly the scrolls perished. Loot cannot preserve what is fragile. What is plundered without care is soon destroyed. The long decline. The sacks were not sudden ends, but stages in a long decline. Rome's libraries were weakened already, by fire, by neglect, by shrinking resources. The invasions hastened what was inevitable, the dispersal of Rome's memory. By the early Middle Ages, the great libraries were gone. Only fragments remained, preserved in monasteries, copied by monks in cold scriptoria, transmitted slowly into the chain of medieval learning. What had been a flood became a trickle. What had been a chorus became a whisper, a vision of absence. Close your eyes and picture it. A Roman library just after the sack. The marble columns still stand. The statues gaze blankly, their faces cracked. The niches are empty. The shelves are bare. Dust drifts in the sunlight slanting through broken windows. In one corner lies a single scroll, torn, trampled, half-burned. The ink is smudged, the words unreadable. A scholar kneels beside it, cradling it as though it were a dying child. He knows it cannot be saved. Around him silence, the silence of centuries beginning now, the legacy of loss. And yet, even in loss, something remains. The idea of Rome's libraries endures, as dream, as symbol, as warning. The sacks remind us that memory can be undone not only by accident, but by violence. That knowledge is not immune to swords. That the words of poets and philosophers are as vulnerable as the bodies of soldiers and citizens. The invaders took Rome's treasures, but they also left us a lesson. That forgetting is always near, that we must guard memory not only from time, but from human hands. Thus, the sacks of Rome were not merely political disasters. They were cultural deaths. Each torch, each wagon of plunder, each careless hand tearing a scroll was another step into darkness. Next, we will turn to the mystery of preservation, to the whispers that some of Rome's scrolls were not destroyed but hidden. Perhaps in the deepest vaults of the Vatican, perhaps beneath the Palatine, perhaps still waiting unseen in the shadows of history. The sacks of Rome scattered scrolls like leaves before a storm. Fires turned papyrus to ash. Libraries once filled with voices became hollow chambers of silence. And yet, among the ruins of memory, a whisper persists. Not all was lost. Some say fragments of Rome's knowledge survived, carried away, hidden, guarded in secrecy for centuries. And no place embodies this rumour more than the Vatican, the heart of Christendom, the keeper of mysteries, the walled city of secrets. Could it be that the lost library of Rome still breathes beneath its stones? The birth of the Vatican Library. In the 4th century, Christianity rose from persecution to power. Constantine embraced the cross, and Rome itself was transformed. Temples became churches. Pagan rituals gave way to Christian rites. And with this shift came a new guardianship of memory. The Church inherited fragments of Rome's past. Scrolls and codices, once the pride of emperors, found themselves in monasteries, cathedrals, and the hands of bishops. Some were recopied, preserved in scriptoria by patient monks. Others vanished, condemned as pagan or heretical. By the 15th century, the Vatican Library was formally established. But long before its official founding, whispers suggest that precious manuscripts had already been gathered there. Texts saved from ruin, carried across centuries, hidden in vaults beneath St. Peter's, the secret archives. Today, deep within the Vatican, there lies a place called the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, the Vatican Secret Archives. The name stirs the imagination. A labyrinth of corridors, shelves upon shelves, manuscripts reaching back centuries. Most of its contents are administrative, papal letters, records of canon law. And yet, the rumours persist. Some believe that beneath the mundane lies the extraordinary. Scrolls from Rome's lost libraries, treatises thought destroyed, prophecies never revealed. The Vatican itself insists otherwise, but secrecy breeds curiosity. And so the legend grows, that among its countless manuscripts lies the ghost of the lost library of Rome. The transfer of knowledge. It is not impossible. Consider, when Rome was sacked in 410, 455, 546, the church was already a power in the city. Bishops and priests would have had reason to protect manuscripts, especially those useful for theology, history, or philosophy. Monks were already the new scribes, copying tirelessly in dim light. Some scrolls, fragile but precious, may have been carried into church vaults. Others may have been sealed away in the catacombs, hidden beneath stone altars, preserved in secrecy. Over centuries, such collections could easily have found their way into the Vatican's growing archive. What better guardian than the Church, whose mission was eternal, whose reach spanned centuries, whose vaults were sanctified as holy ground? The whisper of forbidden texts. But not all knowledge was welcome. The early Church was wary of pagan philosophy, of texts devoted to forgotten gods, of rituals considered heretical. Some were burned outright, but others, perhaps, were hidden. Better to lock away dangerous scrolls than to risk their spread. Imagine a bishop in the 5th century holding a scroll of Egyptian hymns or Babylonian astrology. To destroy it feels wasteful, to share it feels perilous. So instead, he locks it away. The scroll survives, but in silence. Thus, the Vatican's archives may contain not only the sacred but the forbidden. Scrolls never meant to be read, preserved precisely because they were too dangerous to destroy. The symbol of secrecy. The idea of hidden scrolls beneath the Vatican is powerful because it speaks to our deepest longings and fears. We long to believe that the wisdom of Rome was not wholly lost, that somewhere, preserved in shadow, it still exists. We fear too that such wisdom is controlled, hidden from us, guarded by those who choose what we may know and what we may not. The Vatican, with its walls, its guards, its long corridors of locked shelves, becomes the perfect vessel for this dream. Whether or not the scrolls truly lie there, the imagination insists they must. Stories from the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, humanists scoured Europe for lost texts. Monasteries yielded treasures, Cicero's letters, Lucretius's poetry, forgotten treatises of philosophy. Each discovery felt like a resurrection, the dead speaking again. But what of the Vatican? Rumours swirled that its vaults contained far more than it revealed. Scholars whispered of texts too explosive to share, works of alchemy, forbidden gospels, treatises on ancient machines, prophecies of the world's end. Some stories told of manuscripts brought secretly from Constantinople after its fall in 1453, carried westward to safety. Others spoke of scrolls found in Rome's ruins, hidden away by priests. Each rumour added to the legend of the Vatican as heir to the lost library. An imagined descent. Close your eyes and picture the descent. You stand in a dim corridor beneath the Vatican. The air is cool, dry, heavy with dust. Shelves stretch into darkness, filled with leather-bound volumes, boxes of parchment, rolls of papyrus tied with faded cords. Candles flicker, their light casting long shadows on the walls. You run your hand along a row of manuscripts. Titles gleam in Latin and Greek. Then, in a forgotten corner, you find a bundle older still. The tag is written in faded ink, barely legible. Historia Carthagines, the history of Carthage, a work long thought lost. Your heart quickens. You open another chest. Inside lie scrolls blackened at the edges, carbonized but intact, their words waiting to be coaxed back to life. A whisper runs through your mind. These are not gone. They are only hidden. Between hope and doubt, skeptics remind us that evidence is scant. The Vatican's archives, though vast, have been studied by scholars. They contain treasures, yes, but not miracles. No lost Aristotle, no vanished Livy, no secrets of Rome. And yet, secrecy remains. Not every shelf is open, not every vault is known. The archives stretch so deep, so broad, that few can say with certainty what lies within. Doubt feeds belief, and belief feeds the legend. Perhaps the lost library is not there at all. Perhaps it never was. And yet the idea endures, because it satisfies the ache left by absence. It promises that forgetting was not complete, that somewhere memory still sleeps. The Library of Dreams. In the end, the Vatican's archives are as much dream as reality. They are the vessel into which we pour our longing for what is lost. We imagine Livy's missing books resting there, intact. We dream of Cicero's unwritten speeches, Aristotle's vanished treatises, the lost plays of Aeschylus. We picture scrolls of ancient maps, texts of forbidden rites, diagrams of forgotten machines, all hidden, waiting. Whether or not the reality matches the dream is almost secondary. The dream itself sustains us. It keeps alive the hope that knowledge is never truly gone, only sleeping in shadow. The guardian silence. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is this. If such scrolls did survive, would we even be told? Knowledge is power. To reveal it is to risk changing the world. Perhaps some guardians believe it is safer left hidden. Perhaps they fear the disruption of our ancient prophecies, the spread of dangerous sciences, the challenge to authority. Thus the silence of the Vatican may be deliberate. Not absence, but choice. Not emptiness, but restraint. We cannot know. And so, the Vatican stands as symbol, the keeper of secrets, the guardian of memory, the possible heir to Rome's lost library. Whether true or myth, the image endures, of scrolls hidden beneath its stones, waiting in darkness, whispering still. Next, we will turn from secrecy to discovery. The role of archaeology in uncovering fragments of Rome's memory, the papyri of Herculaneum, the burnt scrolls revived by science, the shards of knowledge rising again from ash. For centuries, the story of Rome's lost libraries seemed one of silence only. Fire consumed, invaders scattered, scrolls perished. The scholars were forgotten, their voices reduced to dust, and yet, silence is never absolute. Sometimes, against all odds, memory stirs again. Sometimes a fragment is unearthed, a sliver of ink recovered, a whisper carried forward through ash and earth. Archaeology has become the medium of resurrection, coaxing voices back from darkness. The lost library may remain hidden, but fragments of its world continue to return to us, piece by fragile piece. The Villa of the Papyri, perhaps the most haunting discovery of all, lies not in Rome itself, but in Herculaneum, a coastal town near Naples. In 79 CE, Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath volcanic ash and pyroclastic flows. Life ended in an instant. Buildings, bodies, treasures, all entombed. For nearly 1700 years, the towns lay hidden. And when excavations began in the 18th century, something extraordinary emerged. Beneath layers of hardened lava, archaeologists uncovered a villa, vast, luxurious, adorned with statues, mosaics, colonnades. It came to be called the Villa of the Papyri. And in its chambers they found not jewels, not coins, but scrolls, hundreds of them. The heat of the eruption had carbonized them, turning them into blackened cylinders. At first they seemed ruined, nothing more than lumps of charcoal. But when scholars looked closer, they realized these were books. The only ancient library to survive, albeit in fragile, burned form. Imagine holding one, a cylinder brittle as ash, so delicate it crumbles at the touch. Yet within its layers lie words, Greek philosophy, Epicurean treatises, poems, thoughts, frozen in time. A library preserved not by intention, but by catastrophe. The struggle to read the burnt scrolls. The Herculaneum papyri are a paradox. They survived precisely because they were destroyed. The volcanic fire sealed them, preserving them from rot and insects. But in that preservation, they became nearly illegible. For centuries, scholars tried to unroll them, often with disastrous results. The fragile layers would break, the ink would fade, the words would vanish in the attempt. Yet perseverance continued. By the 19th century, careful techniques allowed some to be opened. Later, infrared photography revealed traces of ink invisible to the naked eye. Now, in our own century, technology has advanced further. X-ray scans and digital reconstruction allow us to peer inside the scrolls without touching them, layer by layer, coaxing out letters long thought lost. Slowly, the papyri yield their secrets. Most of the texts so far are works of the philosopher Philodemus, a disciple of Epicurus. His writings on ethics, rhetoric, and theology speak of a world where philosophy was not abstract but a way of living. Yet scholars suspect more treasures lie hidden among the unopened scrolls. Perhaps even lost works of Aristotle, histories of Rome, poems we have never known. The Villa of the Papyri whispers to us that loss is never total, that the past can be sealed like a seed beneath ash, waiting for patient hands to bring it back to life. Fragments in the sand. Beyond Herculaneum, discoveries across Egypt and the Near East have also brought fragments of Rome's lost world. In the sands of Oxyrhynchus, an ancient Egyptian city under Roman rule, archaeologists uncovered a mountain of papyrus fragments, scraps discarded, recycled, used as wrapping or packing. When the city was abandoned, the dry desert air preserved them. For more than a century, scholars have sifted through them. The fragments are small, often just a few words, half a sentence. But together they are astonishing. Lost plays of Sophocles, new verses of Sappho, forgotten gospels, accounts of daily life, letters, contracts, recipes. Each scrap is a window into the ordinary and the extraordinary alike. Each scrap reminds us how much once existed and how much still lies buried. The palimpsests. There is another kind of discovery, more subtle, the palimpsest. In the Middle Ages, parchment was precious. Monks often scraped clean old manuscripts to reuse the pages. The original text was not fully erased, only hidden beneath new ink. With modern imaging, these erased words can be recovered. Beneath medieval prayers, scholars have found classical texts, scientific treatises, works thought lost. The parchment itself became a tomb, the words buried beneath later hands, yet not gone. Every palimpsest is a ghost, a whisper beneath a louder voice. To read them is to resurrect silence. The shards of memory. Each fragment, each scrap, each recovered word is small, yet together they hint at the immensity of what was lost. A single line of a poem, a single name in a list, a single phrase in a letter. Each is a thread pulled from the void, a fragment of tapestry that once covered the world. And we cannot help but wonder, if such fragments can return, what else might await? What libraries lie still buried beneath earth and ash? What scrolls sealed in forgotten chambers? What parchments hidden in caves? The role of technology. Today, science itself has become a new scribe. Machines peer where eyes cannot. Imaging reads ink invisible to light. Algorithms reconstruct letters blurred beyond recognition. The work is slow, delicate, filled with uncertainty. But it is work of resurrection. Each recovered word is a triumph against forgetting. Each rediscovered phrase is a voice returned from the grave. In a way, technology has become the modern counterpart of the scribe, painstakingly copying, restoring, preserving. Where once reed pens and wax tablets fought against time, now lasers and scanners do the same. The dream of future discoveries. And so we dream. We dream that beneath the streets of Rome, sealed chambers hold scrolls untouched by flame. We dream that new excavations will reveal forgotten villas with libraries intact. We dream that unopened bundles in Herculaneum may yet hold works of Aristotle, Livy, or lost poets whose names we do not even know. Every discovery feeds the dream. Every fragment is a reminder that forgetting is not absolute, that memory can be reborn. An imagined excavation. Close your eyes and imagine it. A team of archaeologists digging beneath a ruined Roman villa. Their spades strike stone. They clear dust. A doorway appears, sealed for centuries. They break it open, step inside. The air is dry, untouched. The chamber is lined with shelves. On the shelves, bundles of scrolls tied in faded cords, waiting. One is opened, carefully. The ink is faint but clear. It is a book of Livy, one of the missing volumes. The room falls silent. For a moment, the centuries dissolve. A voice thought gone speaks again. This is the dream of archaeology, the dream of resurrection, the meaning of fragments. Even without such miracles, the fragments we have are precious. They remind us that knowledge is not wholly gone, that memory is not utterly erased. Every scrap, every palimpsest, every burned papyrus is a whisper of survival. And sometimes, a whisper is enough. It tells us that the past still reaches out to us, that silence is never absolute, that even in ruins, memory breathes. Thus, archaeology becomes not just science but poetry. It is the act of listening to the earth, of coaxing the dead to speak again, of piecing together voices from shards of silence. The lost library may never be found in full, but in fragments, in whispers, in faint letters drawn from ash, we glimpse its shadow. And the shadow is enough to remind us of the vastness of what once was. Next, we will turn from fragments to faith, to the way memory lived on in the hands of monks, copied in candlelight through the long night of the Middle Ages, ensuring that at least some of Rome's wisdom survived the fall. When Rome fell, its marble halls cracked, its colonnades toppled, its libraries emptied, and its scrolls burned or scattered. The city that once called itself eternal seemed to dissolve into silence, but memory is stubborn. Knowledge, once spoken, once written, does not surrender easily. Even in the darkest of centuries, a few carried the flame. They were not emperors, nor senators, nor generals. They were men in plain robes, bent over wooden desks in cold stone rooms. They were monks, and they became the guardians of what little survived. The silent scriptoria. Step into a medieval scriptorium. The room is narrow, the air heavy with wax and ink. A small window admits pale light, too faint to warm the chill. At long wooden tables sit monks in dark robes, hoods drawn, heads bent low. Their quills scratch softly upon parchment, the sound like insects in summer grass. Each monk works in silence. Before him lies an older manuscript, sometimes a Roman codex, sometimes a crumbling papyrus. Line by line he copies it onto new parchment, preserving it for another generation. Hours pass, his fingers cramp, his eyes blur, but still he writes. This is the rhythm of centuries, steady, patient, unbroken. In these dim rooms the memory of Rome found refuge, the transformation from scroll to codex. In these monasteries the form of memory itself changed. Rome's libraries had relied on scrolls, long rolls of papyrus unrolled and rolled again. But in the monasteries, a new form rose. the codex, pages bound together, easier to read, easier to copy, easier to store. Many of the Roman works that survived did so because monks transferred them from fragile scrolls to sturdier codices. The act was not only preservation but transformation. A scroll became a book. A fragment of Rome was reborn in medieval skin. The selection of survival. But not every work was copied. Not every scroll was chosen. The monks were selective, sometimes by necessity, sometimes by faith. Texts deemed useful for Christian teaching, histories, rhetoric, philosophy, were more likely to be preserved. Pagan poetry survived if it was admired, but works considered dangerous, heretical, or irrelevant often perished. Thus, the survival of Rome's memory depended on choices made by quiet men in candlelight. Choices of taste, of belief, of chance. They copied Virgil, Cicero, Augustine. They let vanish countless others. Imagine a monk unrolling a fragile scroll of Lucretius's On the Nature of Things. He hesitates. Its talk of atoms, of a world without gods, troubles him. Does he copy it or consign it to dust? His decision shapes what we know, centuries later. The patience of the quill. To understand the monk's devotion, imagine the labour. A single manuscript might take months to copy. Ink made from oak galls, quills carved from goose feathers, parchment stretched from animal skins. Each page was costly, each letter deliberate. A mistake meant scraping the surface with a knife, rewriting carefully. Hours of work could vanish with a slip of the hand. Yet the monks persevered. They believed they were not merely copying words but preserving the wisdom of ages for God's glory. Their patience was an act of devotion. And so, through the slow scratching of quills, Rome's voice continued to whisper. The great monastic centres. Across Europe, certain monasteries became beacons of preservation. In Ireland, remote from the chaos of the continent, monks in windswept stone cells copied not only scripture, but also Roman texts. They became the keepers of learning, their libraries islands of memory in a sea of forgetting. On the continent, monasteries like Monte Cassino in Italy and St. Gall in Switzerland preserved works of law, medicine, philosophy. In Byzantium, scribes in Constantinople kept Greek traditions alive, copying Aristotle, Plato, Galen. Each monastery was a small flame in a vast darkness. Alone, they seemed fragile. Together they formed a constellation of survival, the palimpsests of silence. But parchment was scarce, and sometimes monks scraped old texts to reuse the pages. Beneath prayers and psalms, ancient words still lingered, faint but unforgotten. These palimpsests are double voices, the chant of medieval monks over the ghostly echo of Roman authors. With modern eyes we can recover those buried words. We discover fragments of Aristotle, Galen, Cicero hidden beneath the ink of chants. The monks may have thought they were erasing, but in truth they only concealed. The silence of forgetting is never total. Memory waits, even in shadows. The beauty of the manuscripts. The monks did not only preserve words, they adorned them. Illuminated manuscripts shimmer with gold leaf, vibrant inks, intricate borders. Even pagan texts, when copied, were often given sacred care. The beauty itself became an act of preservation. Imagine opening a medieval codex of Virgil, its letters dark against parchment, its margins filled with curling vines and painted birds. The text is Roman, but the decoration is medieval. A dialogue across centuries, a marriage of voices. In this way, the monks did not only copy Rome, they transformed it into something new, something both ancient and timeless. The long night of memory. For centuries, these scriptoria kept the chain alive. Europe slipped into what some call the Dark Ages, but within monastery walls light flickered. While empires rose and fell, while wars raged and cities burned, the monks copied and recopied, their work unnoticed, their patience unbroken. It is because of them that we know Cicero's speeches, Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses. It is because of them that Aristotle's philosophy returned to guide the Renaissance. Without their devotion, the silence of Rome might have been absolute, the whisper of what was lost. And yet, how much was not copied? How much was left to perish? Entire histories, whole shelves of poetry, scientific works beyond imagining. The monks saved what they could, but their priorities shaped what reached us. The result is not the fullness of Rome, but a filtered echo. We must be grateful and mournful at once. Grateful for what survives, mournful for what was allowed to vanish. An imagined night in the scriptorium. Close your eyes and picture it. It is midnight. The monastery is silent. Snow drifts outside the stone walls. In the scriptorium a single lamp burns. A lone monk sits at his desk, quill in hand. He bends over a codex, copying carefully, line by line. On the page before him are the words of Livy, one of the few volumes that escaped fire and sack. He copies slowly, reverently, as though each word is a prayer. He knows that without his hand these words may vanish forever. He does not know his name will be forgotten, but his work will endure. The book he copies will survive centuries, passed from library to library, until at last it rests in the hands of scholars who will call it ancient. The monk himself will vanish into obscurity, but through him Rome will speak again. The bridge to the future. The monks were not Rome. They were not philosophers in togas debating in forums. They were not emperors building marble halls. They were humble, cloistered, devout, and yet they became Rome's heirs. Through their quiet patience, the wisdom of antiquity crossed the gulf of centuries. Through their candlelit nights, the voices of Rome reached the Renaissance where they blossomed anew. They were the bridge across the dark, the fragile flickering bridge of ink and parchment that carried memory into the future. Thus the monks were the medieval guardians of Rome's memory. They saved fragments, they lost others, but above all they kept the chain unbroken. Without them, the lost library would be total. With them, it is only partial. Next, we will turn to the Renaissance, the rebirth of memory, when forgotten texts emerged from monastery shelves, and Rome's voice was heard again with renewed power. For centuries Rome's memory slumbered in cloisters, whispered only in candlelit scriptoria. Monks, with patient quills, kept alive what they could, though much was lost. The libraries of emperors lay in ruins. The scrolls of poets had turned to dust, and the world seemed to have forgotten its ancient brilliance. But silence is never eternal. In the 15th century a new wind began to stir across Europe. A hunger awoke in men's hearts, a hunger for the wisdom of the ancients, for the lost voices of Rome and Greece. They called it Renascita, rebirth. We know it now as the Renaissance, and in this rebirth, the ghosts of Rome's libraries began to return. The humanists' quest. The heroes of this age were not warriors with swords, but scholars with eyes aflame. They called themselves humanists, men who believed that human dignity, reason, and beauty could be rediscovered through the study of antiquity. They scoured monasteries, cathedrals, private collections. They wrote letters, travelled dangerous roads, bribed abbots and bishops, pleaded for access to dusty shelves. They were treasure hunters, but their gold was ink. Imagine a scholar stepping into a monastery library. The room is cold, silent, filled with rows of neglected volumes. Dust lies thick upon them. He pulls one from the shelf, opens it carefully, and gasps. Before him is a work thought lost for 1,000 years. Cicero's letters, Lucretius's verses, Quintilian's treatises. His heart races. He feels as though he is in the presence of the dead, speaking again. These discoveries were more than books. They were resurrections. Poggio Bracciolini and the Lost Treasures. One name shines in this story. Poggio Bracciolini, a papal secretary and passionate hunter of manuscripts. In 1417, Poggio visited a monastery in Germany. There, in a dusty corner, he found a manuscript containing Lucretius's De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. This poem, a Roman exploration of atoms, infinity, and the mortality of the soul, had been lost for centuries. Poggio's discovery changed history. The text spread across Europe, influencing science, philosophy, and art for generations. Poggio found more, works of Cicero, Quintilian, and Vitruvius. Each manuscript he uncovered was a window reopened, a voice restored. The revival of Cicero and Virgil. The Renaissance adored Cicero. His eloquence became a model for statesmen, his moral writings a guide for thinkers, his letters a glimpse into the heart of the Republic. Without the monk's patient copying, Cicero might have been lost entirely. Without the humanists' rediscovery, he might have remained buried in obscurity. Virgil too was reborn. His Aeneid, long preserved, became more than poetry. It became inspiration for new art, new empires. Painters illustrated his verses, scholars dissected his lines, rulers saw themselves reflected in his heroes. Rome lived again, not in armies or marble, but in words. The spread of knowledge. The rediscovery of texts coincided with another miracle, the printing press. Where once manuscripts had to be copied by hand, slowly, painfully, Now they could be printed in dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The fragile chain of memory became stronger, multiplying, spreading across Europe. Imagine the thrill of a student in Florence holding a printed copy of Aristotle, a book once locked in a monastery vault, now fresh from the press, ready to shape his mind. The wisdom of Rome, once nearly lost, now raced like fire across the continent. The Renaissance was not only rebirth, it was acceleration. Memory, long flickering, blazed anew. The rebirth of architecture and art. The recovery of Roman texts did not remain on parchment. It reshaped stone and paint. Vitruvius's treatise on architecture, once forgotten, was rediscovered. Architects studied it and began to build again in Roman style, domes, columns, arches. The Renaissance city became a mirror of antiquity, Rome reborn in Florence, Venice, and beyond. Poets imitated Virgil, philosophers argued with Seneca, statesmen modelled themselves on Cicero. Rome's lost voices became guides for a new age. Even artists, Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, drew upon the rediscovered wisdom of antiquity. The human body, once studied by Galen and lost in part, was examined anew. Proportions, harmony, balance, all returned, all inspired by Rome, the whisper of the missing. Yet even amid triumph, the shadow of loss remained. The humanists knew they had recovered only fragments. For every Cicero found, there was another historian lost. For every Virgil, another poet vanished. Poggio and his peers spoke often of works they longed for but could not find. Livy's missing books, Aristotle's vanished treatises, plays of Sophocles and Aeschylus, histories of Carthage and Etruria. Their joy was mingled with mourning. Each discovery reminded them of what still lay silent. The lost library lingered as absence even in the moment of rebirth. The Vatican's role. The Church itself, once wary of pagan learning, became a patron of rediscovery. Popes collected manuscripts, sponsored libraries, encouraged copying. The Vatican Library grew vast, filled with treasures gathered from across Europe and the East. And yet, secrecy remained. Not all was shared openly. Some manuscripts stayed locked in vaults, accessible only to a few. The legend of hidden scrolls deepened, even as new discoveries spread. Rome, now Christian, became once again a custodian of memory, but a selective one, deciding which voices to amplify and which to silence. The awakening of Europe, the impact of the rediscoveries was immense. The Renaissance became a conversation with antiquity, a dialogue across centuries. Philosophers debated Aristotle anew. Scientists studied Lucretius and turned toward atoms and infinity. Artists drew upon ancient ideals of beauty. It was as if Rome, long buried, had begun to speak again in the ears of a new generation. The whispers of the past became shouts of inspiration. The lost library was not fully found, but enough of it returned to transform the world. An imagined discovery. Close your eyes and picture a humanist scholar in the 15th century. He stands in a monastery library, its shelves dark and neglected. He pulls a dusty codex from a forgotten chest, opens it carefully, and his breath catches. Before him are words unseen for 1,000 years. The ink is faded, the parchment fragile, but the voice is clear. A Roman historian speaks again, his lines sharp, his thought alive. The scholar feels tears on his cheeks. He knows at this moment that he holds not just a book, but a resurrection. The silence of centuries is broken. This is the essence of the Renaissance, the thrill of voices returning from the grave. The legacy of rediscovery. The Renaissance did not find everything. The lost library remains lost, but it restored enough to change the course of history. Without those rediscoveries, modern science, philosophy, politics, and art would be unrecognizable. The humanists were not only scholars, they were midwives of memory, bringing forth the ancient world into a new age. Their work reminds us that forgetting can be resisted, that silence can be broken, that even after centuries the dead can speak again. Thus the Renaissance was the rebirth of Rome's voice, not complete, not perfect, but powerful enough to ignite a new world. Next, we will turn to the myths that grew around what remained hidden. For even as rediscovery blossomed, legends of secret orders, hidden scrolls, and forbidden knowledge multiplied. And in those legends, the lost library gained new life as a treasure forever sought but never fully found. History speaks in fragments, in ruins and parchments, in names half remembered. But where silence reigns, the imagination blooms. When scrolls vanish, legends rise to take their place. And among these legends, few are as enduring as the myths of secret orders, guardians of hidden knowledge, heirs to libraries the world believes lost. The fall of Rome left a vacuum of memory. Into that vacuum stepped whispers of Templars, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and other brotherhoods cloaked in ritual. Could they, some wonder, have preserved fragments of the ancient world? Could the lost library live still, not in marble halls, but in secret vaults beneath the hands of initiates? The Knights Templar, guardians of hidden scrolls. The Templars, warrior monks of the 12th and 13th centuries, became legends not only for their military might, but for their rumoured treasures. When they established their headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, whispers spread that they had found scrolls hidden beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. Scrolls of secret wisdom, ancient rites, forgotten histories. Some tales claim they carried these manuscripts back to Europe, hiding them in their commanderies and fortresses. Perhaps, it is said, some of those texts traced back not only to the Hebrews but to Rome itself. Fragments of lost philosophy, forgotten sciences, forbidden rituals once housed in imperial libraries. When the Templars fell in 1312, accused of heresy and dissolved by papal decree, legends claim their treasures vanished with them. Gold, relics, and, perhaps, scrolls. Where they went, no one knows. Some say to Scotland, others to Portugal, still others to vaults beneath the Vatican. And so the Templars became entwined in the myth of the lost library, imagined as guardians of wisdom too dangerous to reveal. The Rosicrucians, keepers of esoteric truths. In the 17th century, another brotherhood emerged in whispers, the Rosicrucians. Their manifesto spoke of a hidden order devoted to the pursuit of secret knowledge, blending alchemy, mysticism, and science. They claimed to possess ancient wisdom passed down through hidden channels, preserved from destruction. Some believed this wisdom traced back to Egypt, to Greece, to Rome itself. The Rosicrucians became symbols of continuity, the idea that knowledge, though burned in libraries, lived on in secret veins carried by chosen initiates. What if, their followers asked, fragments of Rome's lost scrolls lay not in ruins, but in the hands of these hidden sages? What if the lost library survived, not as stone halls, but as a brotherhood of memory? The Freemasons, builders of hidden memory. The Freemasons, rising in prominence from the 17th century onward, wrapped themselves in symbols of temples, compasses, and hidden wisdom. Their rituals spoke of ancient knowledge. Their lodges whispered of continuity with forgotten ages. Though most of their lore is allegorical, myths grew that they too were heirs to Rome's memory. That scrolls lost to the sack of the city found their way into Masonic vaults. That rituals encoded fragments of forgotten philosophies. That their very architecture echoed Vitruvius and the ancient Roman builders. The Freemasons became, in legend, not only builders of cathedrals but preservers of knowledge. Silent custodians of the library no one else could see. Why secret orders attract the lost? It is no accident that secret societies are linked to lost libraries. Both thrive on absence. A library that is missing invites speculation. An order that is hidden invites imagination. Combine the two, and you have a myth too alluring to resist. We long to believe that what was lost is not truly gone, that it survives in hidden hands, and we long to believe that someone, somewhere, knows more than we do. That a brotherhood guards secrets waiting for the right time to be revealed. Thus, the lost library becomes not only a ruin but a treasure map. The scrolls are hidden but guarded. The knowledge is lost but recoverable. The silence is deep but not absolute. The Vatican and the orders. The Vatican itself, long rumoured to hold fragments of Rome's wisdom, often becomes entangled with these legends. Some stories say the Templars entrusted their scrolls to the Church, who hid them in the secret archives. Others whisper that the Rosicrucians or Freemasons infiltrated the Vatican, carrying away what they found. Fact and fiction blur. But the myth endures, that the memory of Rome is not destroyed but controlled, parcelled out in shadows, its guardians hidden behind cloaks of ritual. The allure of forbidden knowledge. Why do these stories persist? Because they speak to the deepest hunger of the human spirit, the hunger for forbidden knowledge. We dream that somewhere exists a scroll that explains the mysteries of the pyramids, or maps lands across the ocean, or reveals machines centuries ahead of their time. We imagine texts of prophecy, predicting not only Rome's fall but events yet to come. We yearn to believe that what has been forgotten is not truly gone, only hidden. And in secret orders that yearning finds a vessel. An imagined scene of guardianship. Close your eyes and imagine. a stone chamber deep beneath a fortress. The air is cool, silent, broken only by the drip of water. Torches flicker against the walls. In the centre stands a chest bound in iron, sealed with wax. Around it gather hooded figures, their hands upon their hearts. The chest is opened. Inside lie scrolls, their papyrus blackened with age, their cords frayed. A tag reads Historia Romana. Another reads Ars Mechanica. Another Oracula Sibyllina. The figures bow their heads. They do not read the scrolls. They guard them, for they believe their time has not yet come. This is the myth of the lost library and secret orders, not destroyed, not forgotten, but hidden, awaiting revelation. The symbol, not the fact. Historians remind us there is little evidence for these claims. The Templars left no scrolls. The Rosicrucians may have been more literary invention than actual brotherhood. The Freemasons' lore is symbolic, not literal, and yet the myths are powerful precisely because they are not factual. They are symbolic truths. They tell us that memory, though fragile, endures in imagination, that even when libraries burn, the idea of knowledge survives in myth. The secret orders may not hold the lost library in reality, but in legend they have become its guardians. The enduring dream, and so the myth of secret orders entwines with the myth of the lost library. Whether true or not, they offer hope. The hope that Rome's wisdom was not wholly lost, that it survived in hidden channels, passed down in secrecy, guarded by silent hands. They remind us that knowledge once spoken never dies completely. It finds ways to endure, even in shadow. Perhaps the scrolls truly lie beneath the Vatican. Perhaps they are hidden in Masonic vaults. Perhaps they are gone forever, and only the myth remains. But the myth itself is powerful. It keeps alive the dream that memory can be preserved, that silence is not absolute, that one day the lost voices may return. Thus, the secret orders become not only figures of history but symbols of longing. They are the embodiment of our refusal to accept forgetting. They are the guardians of hope itself. Next, we will step from myth into prophecy, to the Sibylline books and the strange oracles Rome once kept, words of fate guarded by priests, perhaps entwined with the mystery of the lost library itself. Among the many scrolls that Rome once held, none carried more awe, fear, or reverence than the Sibylline books. They were not histories, not philosophies, not poems. They were prophecies, oracles of fate, consulted in times of crisis, guarded in secrecy, believed to hold the destiny of Rome itself. If Rome's lost library is the dream of forgotten wisdom, the Sibylline books are its beating heart of mystery, for they remind us that knowledge was not only about the past, it was also about the future, about what might come, about what must come, the legend of their arrival. The story begins in legend, as many Roman tales do. In the days of the last kings of Rome, before the Republic, a mysterious woman came to the palace of Tarquinius Superbus. She was old, with eyes like coals, and she carried 9 books. She offered them to the king at a great price. Tarquin laughed and refused. The woman burned 3 of the books and offered the remaining 6 at the same price. Again he refused. She burned 3 more and offered the last 3 at the same price as before. Alarmed, Tarquin accepted. Those 3 books became the Sibylline books, a sacred collection of prophecies, said to have been dictated by the Sibyl of Cumae, a priestess whose voice carried the breath of Apollo. From the very beginning, the books were bound to fire, loss, and mystery, guardians of the oracles. The Sibylline books were housed in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, locked in a stone chest guarded by priests known as the Quindecimviri, the 15 men. They were consulted only in times of great crisis, plagues, wars, omens in the sky. When Rome trembled, the Senate ordered the priest to open the chest and seek guidance. The priests unrolled the scrolls, read the cryptic verses, and returned with commands: to build a temple, to perform a sacrifice, to import a foreign cult, to make peace or war. The people believed these instructions came not from men, but from destiny itself, the power of prophecy. The Sibylline books were not mere curiosities. They shaped Rome's history. When Hannibal threatened the city, the books advised bringing in the cult of the Great Mother from Asia Minor. When plagues struck, they instructed sacrifices and rituals. When lightning struck temples, they prescribed expiations. Each consultation was an act of surrender. Rome, proud and rational, submitting to prophecy. The empire of legions and law bowed its head to verses on papyrus. The power of the Sibylline books lay not in their detail, but in their aura. They were believed, and belief can shape destiny. The loss and rebirth? But like all of Rome's treasures, the Sibylline books were not eternal. In 83 BCE, a fire consumed the temple of Jupiter, and with it the oracles. The people mourned as though Rome's very fate had perished. Yet the Senate acted swiftly. Envoys were sent across the Mediterranean to Greece, to Asia, to every shrine where Sibyls had spoken. They gathered new prophecies, new verses, and compiled them into a restored collection. These new books were placed once again in the temple, guarded and revered. Even in loss, Rome sought continuity. Even when the scrolls turned to ash, the belief endured. The Sibyls' voices? Who were the Sibyls, these mysterious women whose words Rome treasured? Legends tell of many. The Sibyl of Cumae, of Delphi, of Erythrae, of Tibur. They were seers, priestesses, mouths of Apollo or other gods. Their words were often cryptic, riddling, like smoke that twists and changes as you gaze upon it. The Sibyl of Cumae appears in Virgil's Aeneid. When Aeneas seeks to enter the underworld, she is his guide. Her words are heavy with fate, her prophecies dark and inescapable. In art, Sibyls are painted as women both young and old, their faces lined with mystery, their eyes filled with distant fire. They are symbols of liminality, between divine and human, between wisdom and madness, between truth and obscurity. The fear of the future. Why did Rome, so proud of its reason and law, cling to such cryptic verses? Perhaps because prophecy speaks to a deeper need, the need to believe that the future is not chaos, that it has shape, that it can be known. The Sibylline books gave that comfort. They turned crisis into ritual, fear into action. When Rome burned, when enemies threatened, when the earth shook, the people could say, "The books will tell us what to do." But prophecy is a double-edged gift. To know the future is to be bound by it. To hear doom foretold is to carry it always. The Sibylline books were both guide and burden. The whispers of forbidden prophecies. Whispers linger that the books contained more than rituals and sacrifices, that among their verses were prophecies of Rome's fall, of barbarians at the gates, of emperors struck down, of temples turned to dust. Some even claim they foretold the coming of Christ, though such claims arose centuries later when Christian writers sought to weave the Sibyls into their story. Could the Sibylline books have spoken of more? Of inventions? Of distant lands? Of the end of the world itself? The question haunts the imagination. If so, perhaps such verses were never revealed. Perhaps they were locked away, hidden, suppressed. Perhaps they are among the scrolls whispered to survive in secret, buried deep in vaults we cannot enter. An imagined consultation. Picture it. Rome trembles under plague. The people are afraid. The Senate convenes and orders the priests to consult the oracles. The temple doors creak open. Torches flicker in the darkness. The stone chest is unlocked. The priests lift the scrolls, unroll them slowly, and begin to read. Their lips move silently. Their eyes widen. At last they return to the Senate with their decree, to build a temple, to perform a sacrifice, to summon a foreign god. The senators obey, not because they understand, but because they believe. The books have spoken. Rome bends to their voice. Now imagine that among those verses was something darker, something they did not dare share. A prophecy not of plague, but of empire's fall. Would they reveal it? Or would they hide it, sealing it away, waiting for the day it must come true? The end of the oracles. In the 4th century CE, as Christianity rose and pagan traditions waned, the Sibylline books came under suspicion. To Christians they were relics of false gods, dangerous remnants of superstition. By order of the Emperor Theodosius, the oracles were destroyed. Once again fire consumed them, once again silence followed, yet their memory lingered. Writers quoted fragments, artists painted sibyls alongside prophets. The aura of prophecy survived even when the scrolls were gone. The Sibylline shadow in the lost library. The story of the Sibylline books is a microcosm of Rome's lost library. They were treasured, guarded, believed. They were burned, rebuilt, burned again. They survived in fragments, in whispers, in art. They live now more as legend than as text, and like the lost library they haunt us, for they remind us that what is lost is never fully gone. Memory survives in shadow. Prophecy survives in whisper. The Sibyls still murmur in imagination, their voices echoing through ruins and dreams. The eternal allure of prophecy. We are drawn to prophecy because it promises what we cannot have. Certainty in the face of time. The Sibylline books embodied that longing. Rome clung to them as one clings to a lamp in the dark. Their loss feels deeper than most, for they promise not only to preserve memory, but to reveal destiny. Their silence is heavier than others because it feels as though the future itself was burned. And yet, perhaps the future cannot be destroyed. Perhaps the Sibyl's voices echo still, not in scrolls, but in us, in our endless hunger to know what lies ahead, in our endless fear that we cannot. Thus, the Sibylline books remind us that Rome's libraries were not only about the past, they were about time itself, past, present, future, bound in papyrus, fragile as breath. Next, we will turn to the twilight of empire, when the libraries of Rome stood on the edge of darkness, and the final decline began. The story of Rome's libraries is inseparable from the story of Rome itself. They rose with the empire's confidence, blossomed in its golden age, and trembled as its power waned. In marble halls and dusty chambers, their fate mirrored that of the eternal city. Slow decline, sudden shocks, and at last a silence that seemed final. The twilight of empire was not a single moment, but a long evening. Shadows lengthened century by century until the light of Rome flickered and faded, and with that fading, her libraries dissolved like ink washed from parchment. The first shadows, the empire's decline, did not begin in fire or invasion, but in subtle erosion. In the 3rd century CE, Rome was shaken by crisis after crisis. Emperors rose and fell in quick succession, borders trembled under pressure, plague stalked the streets. In such times, priorities shifted. Armies demanded coin, not scrolls. Generals guarded frontiers, not libraries. The copying of manuscripts slowed. The care of archives faltered. A scroll uncopied is a scroll already half lost. The first shadows of forgetting fell not with flames, but with neglect. Dust gathered on shelves. Pages crumbled without replacement. Memory began to thin, thread by thread. The division of empire. In 285 CE, the Emperor Diocletian divided Rome into east and west. The idea was pragmatic, to govern more effectively, to secure far-flung provinces. Yet the division was also a fracture. In Constantinople, the new eastern capital, libraries flourished for a time, inheriting Greek and Roman traditions. But in the west, where Rome herself remained, the decline deepened. Wealth drained eastward, stability frayed, and the city that once commanded the world grew brittle. What became of the great libraries in this division? Some collections moved east, others remained, vulnerable to decay and fire. The chain of memory was stretched, and in places it snapped. The rise of Christianity. Another shift reshaped Rome's libraries. The rise of Christianity. The new faith brought new texts, new priorities, new guardianship of memory. The scriptures of the church became central, while pagan works were sometimes neglected, sometimes preserved, sometimes destroyed. Temples became churches. Shelves once filled with Virgil and Cicero were cleared for Augustine and Ambrose. To some Christians, the old texts were dangerous, whispers of false gods, heretical philosophies. To others, they were treasures to be studied and integrated into the new faith. Much depended on chance, on the choices of bishops and monks. Thus, the fate of Rome's libraries was caught in a great turning of spirit. Some works were saved through Christian devotion, others perished through Christian suspicion. Memory survived, but in altered form. The century of fire. The 4th and 5th centuries brought fire, not only neglect. In 364, a fire damaged the Temple of Peace, consuming archives. In 391, riots in Alexandria destroyed the Serapeum and its library, a loss felt across the Roman world. And then, in 410, the unthinkable. Rome itself was sacked by Alaric and the Visigoths. Scrolls that had survived centuries of copying, centuries of care, now lay in ashes. Scribes fled, clutching fragments. Statues toppled. Shelves were emptied. The libraries of emperors and senators, once symbols of Rome's eternity, proved fragile as tinder. The twilight deepened into night. The slow desertion. After the sack, Rome never fully recovered. Its population dwindled, its aqueducts crumbled, its forums fell silent. Where once hundreds of thousands thrived, by the 6th century only tens of thousands remained. What use were libraries to a starving city? Scholars fled to Constantinople, to monasteries, to safer havens. Scrolls were abandoned in empty halls, prey to damp and vermin. Some were reused for other purposes, their words scraped away. Others simply disintegrated, unnoticed. The desertion of libraries was not dramatic, but it was devastating. A scroll unread is a voice unheeded. A scroll unheeded is a voice forgotten. The final blows. The 6th century brought the last blows. In 455 the Vandals plundered Rome, stripping treasures and scattering what remained of her collections. In 546 Totila and the Ostrogoths sacked the city again. By then Rome was hollow, a shell of her former self. Whatever libraries still stood were shattered. Scrolls carried off as spoils, shelves torn down, buildings left to ruin. By the time the empire in the west collapsed in 476, the libraries of Rome were ghosts. Their shelves were bare, their scrolls scattered, their memory dissolved. Constantinople, the last flame. While the west crumbled, the east endured. Constantinople, strong and wealthy, preserved many texts of antiquity. Its scholars copied Aristotle, Plato, Galen. Its libraries became heirs of Greece and Rome. For a time, it seemed the light might survive there. But even Constantinople could not hold it forever. Fires, invasions, and at last the fall of the city to the Ottomans in 1453 scattered much of its memory as well. The twilight of Rome's libraries stretched eastward, lingering for a millennium before fading finally into night. The feeling of twilight. What did it feel like to live in that twilight? Imagine a Roman scholar in the 5th century. He walks through a library where shelves are half empty. Dust covers neglected scrolls. He remembers when the aisles hummed with voices, when senators debated beneath the gaze of statues, when poets read aloud their verses. Now, silence. He takes down a scroll, Livy perhaps, or Cicero. He reads by fading light. He knows fewer and fewer care for such words. He wonders if anyone will read them after him. He feels the weight of twilight, the sense of standing on the edge of forgetting. This was the sorrow of the last guardians of Rome's memory, to watch it slip into silence, knowing they could not stop it. The symbol of decline. The twilight of the libraries became a symbol of Rome itself. The empire did not fall in a single blow. It decayed, eroded, fractured, weakened. So too did its memory. Shelves emptied slowly. Scrolls perished unnoticed. Scholars dispersed. By the end, the loss was not only material, it was spiritual. The dream of gathering all knowledge under one roof, the dream of Augustus, of Trajan, of Hadrian, had faded. Rome no longer aspired to be eternal in wisdom. It struggled only to survive. The twilight of empire was also the twilight of memory. The echo of twilight, and yet even twilight has its beauty. The last glow of Roman libraries fed into monasteries, into Constantinople, into the Renaissance. Though much was lost, much also endured. The twilight did not extinguish the flame entirely. It softened it, dimmed it, scattered it. We live still in that echo. Every time we read Cicero or Virgil, every time we trace Aristotle's thought or marvel at Roman architecture, we hear voices carried across twilight. The libraries are gone, but their shadows linger. Their twilight never fully ended. Thus Rome's libraries passed into silence with the empire itself. They rose with her, flourished in her glory, and declined with her fall. They remind us that memory, like empire, is mortal. And yet both leave traces, whispers, echoes that never fade. The story of Rome's lost libraries is a story of glory and ruin, of memory and forgetting, of voices raised and voices silenced. We have walked through marble halls where scrolls gleamed in torchlight. We have watched flames consume shelves, soldiers plunder volumes, monks copy by candlelight, humanists rediscover forgotten texts. We have wandered through ruins and whispers, through myth and prophecy. Now we come to the end and the beginning. For though the libraries are gone, their legacy endures. Their silence continues to speak. Their absence continues to haunt. The library is a symbol. A library is more than books. It is a vision, the belief that knowledge can be gathered, preserved, made eternal. Rome's libraries were temples of memory, monuments not to gods or emperors, but to the human mind itself. Their loss, then, is more than physical. It is spiritual. When Rome's libraries fell, humanity learned a lesson written in ash, that memory is fragile, that knowledge is mortal, that wisdom must be guarded like flame against the wind. The lost library is not only Rome's, it is every library everywhere that has perished, in fire, in flood, in neglect. It is the echo of Alexandria's ashes, of Baghdad's drowned books, of monasteries burned in war. It is the symbol of forgetting itself, the ache of absence. What hurts most is not what we know we lost, but what we cannot name. We know that Livy wrote 142 books of history and only 35 remain. We know that Aristotle wrote hundreds of treatises, most gone. We know of plays, poems, scientific works that vanish into silence. But beyond what we know, there are works we never even glimpsed. Names never recorded, thoughts never echoed, whole worlds of imagination erased without trace. This is the ache of the lost library, to feel the shape of what is missing without ever holding it, to sense that our inheritance is incomplete, that our vision of antiquity is a fragment of a shattered whole, the persistence of memory. And yet, even in absence, memory persists. Fragments surface, a scrap of papyrus in Egypt, a carbonized scroll in Herculaneum, a line quoted by a later author. Each fragment is a seed. From these seeds, we piece together glimpses of the past. More than that, the dream of the lost library itself preserves memory. Because we long for what was lost, we keep searching, we keep imagining, we keep remembering that there was more. The absence becomes its own kind of presence. The dream of resurrection, the legend of Rome's lost library continues to inspire hope. Archaeologists dig, scientists scan, explorers speculate. Perhaps beneath the Palatine hill, sealed chambers lie untouched. Perhaps in desert caves or shipwrecked cargoes, scrolls still wait. Perhaps in Vatican vaults, manuscripts slumber in secrecy. Each discovery, however small, rekindles the dream. A new fragment of Sappho, a lost play of Sophocles, a rediscovered text of Cicero. Each is a resurrection, proof that forgetting is never absolute. The lost library may never be found in full, but the dream itself is a form of recovery. It keeps alive the belief that the past can return, that silence can be broken, that memory can rise from ash. The warning of forgetting. The libraries also leave us a warning. Rome thought its memory eternal. It built marble halls, appointed guardians, copied and recopied scrolls, yet still it lost more than it saved. Fire, invasion, neglect, chance, all conspired against eternity. The same is true for us. Our libraries are digital, vast, seemingly immortal, but they too are fragile. Files can vanish, servers can fail, knowledge can be drowned in excess as easily as in fire. The lesson of Rome is that memory requires care, constant and deliberate. To preserve is not passive, it is an act of vigilance. The lost library is a warning that forgetting is always near. The whisper of prophecy. There is also a more mysterious legacy, the echo of prophecy. The Sibyllin books are gone, yet their aura lingers. They remind us that libraries are not only about the past but about the future. They hold not only memory, but possibility. Perhaps that is why the loss haunts us so deeply. We fear not only what we have forgotten of Rome's past, but what we might have lost of our own future, discoveries, inventions, insights that might have changed the course of history. The lost library whispers not only of what was, but of what might have been, the eternal human longing. In the end, the legacy of the lost library is human longing itself. We long to know more than we do. We long to gather all knowledge, to hold eternity in our hands. We long to hear every voice, to preserve every thought, to remember everything, and yet we cannot. Our minds, like our libraries, are finite. Forgetting is built into us. The lost library embodies this paradox. It is the symbol of our hunger for total knowledge, and of the impossibility of ever attaining it. It is the eternal tension between memory and forgetting, between light and shadow. An imagined closing vision. Close your eyes one last time. You stand in a vast library, not real, but dream. The marble floors gleam. The shelves stretch upward beyond sight. Scrolls line every wall, their ivory tags glimmering faintly. Statues of poets and philosophers gaze in silence. You walk slowly, reverently through the aisles. You reach for a scroll, untie its faded cord, unroll it. Words spill out. Words you have never read, words the world has not seen in millennia. They speak to you across centuries, fresh as morning. You read until your eyes blur, until the words fade back into shadow. You realize the library is dissolving, the shelves vanishing into mist, the scrolls turning to smoke. You're left alone, holding nothing. And yet the memory of what you read lingers. You cannot forget it, though you cannot name it. It haunts you, it nourishes you, it fills you with longing. This is the lost library, not a place of stone, but a dream of memory. Not wholly gone, not wholly present, a whisper that never ends. The legacy. So what is the legacy of Rome's lost library? It is the reminder that knowledge is precious and fragile. It is the warning that forgetting is always near. It is the inspiration to preserve, to search, to imagine. And above all, it is the dream that no voice is ever fully lost, that silence is never absolute, that even in ruin, memory endures. The lost library lives on, not in marble halls, but in us, in our hunger, in our search, in our endless longing for voices beyond forgetting.